homie from college. If you were designing a sandwich, the best possible sandwich you could think of, what's going into that?
First of all, phenomenal. My goodness. If I were designing a sandwich,
Yeah.
Aiden Garza, Nate's friend from college, designing a sandwich, what would it be?
Aiden
Oh my
Garza, Nate's
gosh. It's such a
former
good
ortho
question.
bro friend from college.
Former ortho bro, Italian ortho bro,
Hmm.
which means I should be Catholic, but I'm not. And
Yes.
that's maybe an
Yeah.
issue I need to take up with someone in the future. Or maybe in this podcast, we're going to encounter
You
that.
went to a
Why
school
Aiden's
called
not
Thomas Aquinas
Catholic.
College, and you're not even Catholic.
Exactly,
You're an
exactly.
anomalous person.
We contradict ourselves every day.
Yeah.
Okay, but so to return to the sandwich, to the carbon-cased topic of this conversation.
Yeah.
Um, okay, let's start with the bread. We're gonna start with just a little less than a foot long sort of style. So you can cut it in half, and so that each half is about like 75% of what a normal sandwich would be.
Yeah.
So it's satiating, right? Like you could split it into two and probably have two meals,
Right.
or a meal and a snack.
Satiating, but not like the sort of thing that your friends can judge quite as
Indeed, indeed, indeed. And there would be two elements, the meat element and then like the salad element to the
well. Okay.
sandwich. I'm not huge on cheese.
Interesting.
So the meat would be,
How are you Italian? I'm just kidding.
well, I know it's shocking. It's shocking. We get existential here, clearly. That's like the existential interjection. Why are you? Okay, so we're gonna start with some kind of baguette, maybe some seeded roll. Closing my eyes to really imagine this.
Yeah.
Cut it in half, but not all the way in half, so you can kind of open it up, right?
Hmm.
Then on there is gonna go like a simple mayonnaise. And the meats would be like a salami, maybe a turkey, so something that's a little salty, something that's plain. And then the salad would be like an arugula-based salad with probably just some olive oil and vinegar just to go on top, some red pepper flakes. Close that thing up, wrap it up, slice it. That's
Yeah.
my ideal
I
sandwich.
like that.
Anyway, that's a phenomenal first question,
Well, yeah, and that's a phenomenal sandwich. I would totally eat that up. Have to differ a
right?
little bit on the cheese, but I think with the
Okay,
right condiments and the right additional stuff going on, you can definitely get away without cheese.
right, right. Do you have any qualms about the Italianness of the sandwich? Do you have any problem with that
The
culture or
Italianality,
no?
yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. No, I don't have
No,
any
okay.
major issues. I'm
Okay.
not Italian, so I'm not here to judge.
Sure.
Uh,
Neither is the Pope, so who cares, you know?
so true.
But yeah.
But do you mean the who am I to judge part of the Italian part? They both apply equally. So yes, this
Wonderful.
is welcome back to another episode of All Good in the Brotherhood. A little production of the Benedict Project. My brother Francisco is not here today. It's just me, Nate, and my homie Aiden. Me and Aiden went to school together at TAC for a while, a couple years. Well, about a year and a half that we actually
Indeed,
overlapped, but it was
indeed,
it
yes.
was bonding. We were never roommates, but we were basically I was in your room all the time, and you were in my room.
Indeed.
When
Indeed. I,
when
I remember, yeah,
when you
many
could bring
things
yourself
about
to
that.
drag yourself out of your room, you were in my room.
Yes, yes. We knew each other at an interesting time in life. And I
We
know over the
did,
past couple weeks we've been kind of reconnecting
yeah, which has been the
about
best.
those days. Even preparing for this, like as we were on the phone beforehand, writing down these great vignettes of like my year and a half there, which
Yeah,
ended up being your 4 years and after I left.
right.
And gosh, I think about that time so fondly, no joke, so fondly.
Mhm.
Yeah, my goodness. It's a pleasure to be on here, really.
Absolutely.
It
No, I'm
is.
so hyped to have you. I mean, I love talking to you. That was kind of part of the impetus of thinking of bringing you on is that we just had a phone call recently to reconnect, and I was like, you know what? Talking to you is just so fun. I feel like we vibe our ways of thinking mesh in a way. It's like at least I enjoy having conversations. Let's hope any of the listeners do. But yeah, so first of all, one difference between us. I'm Catholic, obviously. Aiden is Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, correct?
Sure
Or
thing. I was baptized in a Greek Orthodox church, indeed.
okay. Awesome. And you grow up going to an Orthodox church in Alameda and near San Francisco. Is that correct? Or
Pretty much, yeah. It's a St. Nicholas Orthodox Church. It's part of the OCA,
okay.
Orthodox Church of America. It's in San Anselmo, yeah, which is just 30 minutes north of here, yeah.
Okay. How is you mentioned the OCA? How is the Orthodox Church structured in the U.S.? Because we obviously
Well,
we have like a whole lot of
I'm
layers
not
here.
going to purport to know all about that, but I
That's
will
fair.
throw one word at you, which is autocephaly. And from what I know about how the Orthodox Church functions, the word cephaly, autocephaly, comes from the Greek word for head. So I think it means something like each church in each kind of region has its own head, like
Hmm.
bishop sort of thing. So whereas the Catholic Church has the one pope, the Orthodox Church is structured more around dioceses and bishops,
Okay.
and there's not like one diocese of all dioceses, right? If that makes sense.
Hmm.
So as far as I'm aware, the Orthodox Church in America started, gosh, maybe 1960 is too recent, maybe older than that, but from mostly Russian immigrants to the country. I'm sure the roots of the OCA are Russian in some way, Russian Orthodox. And now it's neither Russian, Greek, it's just the OCA. But now
Interesting.
we have several dioceses across the United States. I'm not sure how many, but each diocese has a bishop. And then under those bishops, of course, are priests. There are various rectors and there are chancellors. I'm not the best person to ask about the nitty-gritty of the
No, so I wasn't
organization,
supposed to be
but
nitty gritty. More than just
of course,
even from talking with you, I remember back in college there were differences,
yes,
kind of in some of the rigidity. I got the sense, at least in terms of teachings, between
big time.
how it's approached in the Orthodox Church versus the Catholic Church.
Right. Yeah, it's tricky because I think there are historical realities to that and
Right.
reasons why the Orthodox Church functions the way that the Catholic Church and the Catholic Church functions the way it does. And so I think you're exactly right. Like growing up as an Orthodox person, I probably have a different paradigm, like a different idea of seeing church authority and the way the church functions compared to a Catholic person. I think that those differences are interesting and illuminating. And I remember we talked a little bit about that at TAC, like in our
Right.
moments, and we'd have kind of funny conversations about it, but also
Yeah.
serious ones. And yeah, in my estimation, I can only speak from my experience, but growing up Orthodox, you don't always think about the church in terms of a global sense, but you think
Mm.
about it in terms of a locality, like a city, or the Greek Archdiocese would call it a metropolis. And you're more connected to your bishop. Now, maybe you are in Catholicism too, but because there is no pope for us, the bishop is sort of the best we got.
Yeah.
Maybe the metropolitan, which is the metropolitan of North America. I think Metropolitan Tikhon it is. But even that figure is not as close to home as a bishop or a priest would be.
Hmm.
So there's more of a local sensibility. Now, of course, Catholics probably have that same feeling, but that's just in my experience what it's been like.
No, I'd say that is a difference actually, because I remember even growing up. Well, definitely you have a strong connection with your parish priest, but other than him, I think the next kind of step up in a lot of Catholics' minds is, yeah, we know we have our parish priest, and then above him somewhere there's the Pope, and we all know the Pope because he's famous and he appears in
Sure.
newspapers and on the news and whatnot.
Yes.
But then what happens in between is a lot more vague, and sort of the things that connect the very local with the most universal is kind of vague. So I remember friends growing up who were very devout. They took the faith seriously. They attended all the church functions, but like they couldn't tell you the name of the bishop because that sense of
Mm,
locality kind of wasn't there. Like they were very familiar. They read a lot about the Pope, and from personal experience, they knew our priest, but they didn't kind of everything in between that was a little bit more
yeah.
localized was sort of
Yeah.
just vague. And I think
Right.
that's we do have a more top down influence in our church probably than y'all do, as opposed to a little bit
Sure
more.
thing.
Well, it's funny. I mean, there's people that are pushing for a more kind of horizontal church, in that
Hmm.
there's more
Yeah.
autonomy among different dioceses and a little bit more of a democratic approach to even decision making. You probably heard
Right.
about like the synod on synodality. It's like a lot of there's a
Right.
lot of meetings and at least theorizing that's been going on among some people pushing for, especially more progressive people in the church pushing for that. But um,
Huh.
yeah, I just don't think that'll be how it pans out. I think it's going to
Yeah,
maintain
that's
its
fascinating.
structure.
As I recall, the conversation we were having a couple weeks ago that sort of spawned this idea to podcast in the first place was something about the difference between top down and bottom up,
Mm,
just as like symbolic functions in
yeah,
the world, but also in the church. I think it's fascinating what you say and definitely true. But that's why I think it's so important to have that like the Catholic and the Orthodox both exist. And I know that the relationship between these two expressions of Orthodox or expressions of Christianity, I know that the relationship is very complicated,
right.
but I also think that there are pitfalls to understanding either as either just top down or just bottom up type thing,
Hmm.
because to call Orthodoxy democratic and then to call Catholicism monarchic or whatever you call
Hmm.
it would be to miss like essential aspects of it, and it'd be almost to make it too governmental.
Too like
I
political
think that
almost.
there are right, like I think that in any organization there's there's a top down and a bottom up, and they have to work together. I know it's
Hmm.
very theoretical. We're getting into this right at the beginning, but I think it's why I'm so happy to be on a podcast like this
Yeah.
and just to talk with you and have friends like yourself. Because, and I'm not foolish enough to think that like there's some mass conversions where like, okay, all the Orthodox are going to become Catholic or all the Catholics are going to become Orthodox. But I think it's a great work in friendships and in human relationships between expressions of Christianity. I think a lot of work can be done there. Not work in terms of conversion, maybe, but just like dialogue, if that makes
Hmm.
sense.
Totally.
Anyway, I hope that resonates with you or with anybody who's listening. But there's a lot there, I know.
I think so, and I think I'm glad you brought up the distinction of like friendship as opposed to some theoretical mass conversion because I think like yeah, we often focus on abstractions of we pray that in the abstract, maybe
Yeah.
all the members of the Christian church that have kind of been separated over the years through various schisms, that they'll all somehow be reunited. But then
Yes.
we forget that that has to happen. If we want any reuniting, it has to happen on a one-on-one basis, friend to friend, you know. Um,
Yes. Yes. That's very wise. There's an Orthodox priest named Father Stephen Freeman, and Father
mhm,
Stephen Freeman, he said a similar thing. I mean, it's just truth that's repackaged, right? But
right,
and it's exactly what you're saying. Even in the gospel stories, when we hear about what Jesus kind of gets up to, you know,
right.
like it's not couched in this sort of universal language. It's always about a particular person. And I love the way that the Catholic Revised Standard Bible put it. Like there's a little footnote in the Bible we read at TAC.
Hmm.
And I remember it was talking about one of these miracles, and it talked about how miracles were not these freak occurrences of kind of magic, right?
Yeah.
Where Jesus is performing these kind of wild things to wow people, but it's an event in time and space that's created for the people around it. And the phrase was, from whom the proper dispositions were required. And that's very heady language, but I think it's important, those words, that the people who God spoke to, who Jesus spoke to, were particular people. And in the same way, like you are a particular person.
Yes.
I'm not talking to just Catholicism
Mhm.
broadly, right? Like you can never
You
talk to
can't. It's
Catholicism. You can never
impossible.
talk. You're always talking to particular people that are members of groups, right? That have certain identities.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's why like this friendship is important. Friendship in general, exactly.
Absolutely, dude. And then in line with that, then just friend to friend, how's your Lent been? Because I know this is a year where
Mm,
is abnormal, where actually I think y'all's Easter and ours lines up, but it falls on the same Sunday. Right?
yeah.
So how has your Lent been? Because I remember back in college, sometimes I would be like, I think I
Another
don't know. I
wonderful
think it would be you
question.
guys sometimes would have at least one year
Yep.
you had an Easter later than us. So I was getting ready to celebrate Easter and I was super hyped. And you're like, well, we still got a long way to go in
Yeah.
our church. So
Yeah.
this year, how's it been for you?
Okay, and well, you have to remind me to reverse this question on YouTube because I want to hear how your Lent
Right.
has been as well.
Absolutely.
This Lent has been different from all the other previous Lents, I'll be honest.
Yeah.
So to contrast it with last year, I think I really went hard on the food part of Lent last time.
Mm,
I had almost no meat, no dairy, like went very orthodox, lowercase o in terms of
hardcore.
like very right, very on
Yes.
course. But emotionally, I was in a very different place. I was still at college in Texas, right? Still away from the family, still living alone, more or less. And so I was going to church a lot less, wasn't commuting to Austin, Texas as much for church. So although I remember thinking last year, although I was really doing the eating part of it, like the food part of Lent, I just didn't feel very dialed in. And more or less this year is sort of a flip of that.
Mm.
We've had a couple unexpected sort of vacation type of things. In fact, this weekend I'm going to Los Angeles again with my mom for a bridal shower, my
Oh, that's
cousin's bridal
awesome.
shower. And so there are these events that are putting a wrench in the food side of Lent. And that's always been a big focus of me, where my relationship to food has been interesting throughout my life. But Lent throws a wrench in those works. And then furthermore, the vacationing and the loss of routine and stuff makes it difficult to stick to the fast, the diet of the fast, that is. I'd say this Lent has been, to be candid, like a step back in some ways. Like I feel that there's so much more work to do. Like St. John Climacus says, like don't be surprised if every day you fall. And that has sort of been the story of this Lent. Maybe not in massive ways, but in little ways, right? Like succumbing to screens, succumbing to shopping, succumbing to not keeping the fast, especially as young guys like us, we exercise, we work out, we want to build muscle, like we want to feel good. And when I'm eating more protein, I feel great. That's a big struggle in that. So, I mean, to be candid, it's been like a mixed experience. I've felt very inspired in liturgy, and the services have been very helpful. Well, more than helpful. They've been life-giving, but there's there's also a lot of work there. So I know that's sort of a broad answer, but it's been an
No,
interesting Lent.
no, that makes sense. I appreciate that. That's kind of how mine's been in a lot of ways.
Uh-huh.
It's been a Lent of continual recommitment. It's
Right.
kind of funny. Sometimes I think we always talk about commitment and how important it is in our spiritual lives and also in our relationships to just have a sense of. So I'm kind of adjusting the lighting right now.
Of course, of course.
This is a little bit dimmer, but I just needed something. Uh,
Of
to have
course.
a sense of recommitment, I think is
Yeah.
almost more important than just having a sense of commitment because commitment only lasts so far until the first time you fall. But then what actually carries
Yeah.
you through, I think what defines good perseverance ultimately in the spiritual life is a spirit of being able to get back up and recommit and not just
Yes.
stick with your initial commitment or your initial intention or resolution. Because
Yes.
for me, for Lent, yeah, there's been a lot of moments where it's like, I said I would give something up, and then a few weeks
Mm,
later, I found myself doing it. Like, for example, one
mm,
thing was a sweets. Which is a very classic example, and I've overall been very good for Lent. But then there's been like a couple times where it's almost not been intentional. It's just been I'm at some event or some function or some party. It's out of the ordinary, not something I'm normally at, and I find myself like, oh wait, I'm eating a sweet right now. What am I doing? And yeah, of course, nothing like morally wrong. It's not like a sin, but it's required some amount of humility and saying, okay, well, I was kind of not locked in this moment and not attentive to overall my goals for my life right now. So I just need to like recommit. So that's happened a number of times. There's been a number of times where part of my resolution is just daily prayer, daily examinations of consciences. And oftentimes those go very well, but sometimes they don't. And I think it's been in some ways shakier than some past years. I remember as a kid, there was almost something really exciting about Lent. I would like enjoy it. I would kind of look forward to it, which sounds masochistic, but it was sort of like I really looked forward to the idea of being very locked in and focused on something spiritual. And I still
right.
value that, but I think this Lent just hasn't been super fun. As a kid, there would be moments where I would really find it almost fun, like a challenge, like a puzzle. Like, yeah, you make this commitment, you maybe make resolutions to fast from certain things, and it's hard, but it's all right. It's exciting that you're pushing through. But this has been a year where even the moments where I am pushing through and maintaining the goals and the resolutions that I have, it just hasn't been that fun. And that again, similar to your answer, it might feel kind of raw, but I think sometimes it's good to just acknowledge that good things and worthwhile things in the spiritual life or worthwhile seasons of our life might not be fun. And they might not always
Yes.
feel very good. You know what I mean? Like you can't always
Yes.
see the immediate positive effects of some of
Yes.
these little things like sacrificing sweets or sacrificing warm showers or sacrificing rock music. It's another thing I've been trying to do, which has been hard during working out, dude, because I've been like also
Very.
on a pretty good workout schedule with a friend, and uh he's really into good rock music, and he's like, dude, I got to show you this band, and it's awesome, and it gives you a good pump, but then you're like, well, this is kind of bending the resolution, so it's hard. Yeah, that was a very long-winded way
I
of
thank you.
saying
No, 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 thank you for
it's been
sharing
hard.
that. Thank you for your rawness for that answer too. The reason I was open, and I appreciate your openness too, is because I was listening to a few episodes of this podcast,
Yeah.
and it struck me how you and your brother have this relationship on camera and on the podcast that obviously is a reflection of your in-person relationship too,
Right.
where you're very frank and you don't skirt around things like relationships and
Hmm.
love and human relationships, which are complicated. I think there was one episode where you were talking about your own relationship with your brother, and it didn't come across as you like bemoaning your situation or lamenting or being too personal. It just struck me as very honest.
Yeah.
And whoever listens to this podcast, whatever situations they're in, it's just fascinating that they vibe with this because
Yeah.
I do too. I've really enjoyed like hearing this. I know there are a lot of like men out there speaking online, right? And they have their different ways of speaking. And people might come to this conversation with those preconceptions, but even just hearing you share, I just really appreciate it because some of the people that are putting their voices out online as men are doing it in a very like very closed off way or a very guarded way, or they're
Hmm.
speaking to make themselves seem. Anyway, that's also a long way of just complimenting what you said. And
Yeah.
the thing about recommitment too, it's hard to admit that we don't get it right the first time.
Right.
And it's like it's a shift, right? It's a paradigm shift where you think about the religious life in one sense when maybe you're young, like I used to think this way. Oh, the religious life is about getting it right and like following the right rules and
Hmm.
just making sure that you're there on Judgment Day, right?
Right.
But then you read St. Augustine, right? You read the Confessions or something like that, and you hear that falling and sinning is just the beginning of this long, long
Hmm.
spiritual life where there are continual recommitments.
Yeah.
And that's why the monastics have, at least the Orthodox monastics, I don't know if the Catholics are this way, where every 3 hours you pray what are called prayers of the hours.
Yeah.
Because the thinking
Right.
is every 3 hours your mind tends to fall towards cupidity or towards
Hmm.
laziness or towards something. And so the religious life comes to light as not a one and done sort of moment,
Hmm.
but as a continual recapitulation, reimagination, rememorialization.
Right.
It's a reenactment, even if you think about like the rituals of the church.
Hmm.
And so this idea of like doing things over again, I think the Latin phrase would be nunc ceopi or something like that.
Hmm.
Or like again I or something.
Right.
It reflects at multiple levels of the spiritual life. So I appreciate you sharing
It
that.
does. That's why I think when Christians fall into the way of speaking where they say like, "Are you saved?" or "I got saved on this date of this year and I remember the distinct moment that it happened." I just don't think that's true to experience. I don't think anybody actually experiences salvation in that way. You know, St.
Yeah.
Paul says, "Work out your salvation in fear and trembling." And that's obviously not in the sense that, oh, you're the one accomplishing it, but more in the process of Christ saving you. He allows that to be a process that we experience
Yes.
continually, not in one moment. And it involves a lot of stumbles and a lot of falls. In fact, even like the word salvation, right? Like we remember we studied Latin together, we had Miss Sedlick for
Right?
Latin. It comes from the Latin word salus, which just means health.
Mm.
And so the
Yes.
process of salvation is less like a light switch off on moment. It's more, in my mind, like the process of healing, like a doctor or physician guiding you
Yes.
through the right medicine and through the right practices so you're
Yes.
ascending towards healing in a state of healing.
Yes.
And so that's not
There's a simple yes.
instantaneous. Like you don't recover from an injury overnight. You don't recover from a disease overnight, except for like there are miracles, right? There are just like there are medical miracles. There are also spiritual miracles, like St. Paul getting knocked off his horse. But for the most, I would say for the majority of us, salvation is a very gradual process. It's a very continual thing that takes our whole life. And so yeah, it's like you said, the falls that happen on the early side of that journey are, we shouldn't look at them as mistakes that threw off the whole journey, but we should look at them as, like you said, and like Augustine says, kind of those first steps or those first signs of progress actually.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's important. That's a great Lenten thing to remember. And I'm
yeah.
glad that we're having this conversation now too, because Lent's about to get real. I mean,
Yeah.
it's been real since the beginning, of course, but you know what I mean. Coming into Holy Week and Palm Sunday and these times are I think the devil tests us too. I think the evil one tests Christians most at these times, which is why you feel more tempted in periods like Lent as well. Wow.
100%, dude.
Well, there's something in there that I was going to grab on and talk about, but would you mind? Maybe could we pivot and talk about some TAC memories for a bit and then get
Yeah.
back to the
Let's do that, dude.
metaphysics stuff because I do want to talk about some specific TAC memories I wanted to bring up with you
Okay.
on camera. And then
This is
maybe
gonna be
we can
interesting. Yeah.
pivot. I want to ask you about Carlos Acutis, who was just canonized.
Yeah.
What's the deal with that? Unbelievable. The Orthodox would never canonize a millennial. And I don't say that to disparage the Catholics or to encourage the Orthodox. I
Right.
just mean that the fact that someone's in a I don't know if you call it a tomb with like sweats on, with like a sweatsuit on, is
Yeah.
just so cool to me.
Bro literally had a
So,
PlayStation.
yeah,
There
okay,
is
okay,
now a
so
PlayStation 2 that is a second
yeah,
class relic. That's insane.
unbelievable. Can you play it? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Then, so want to talk about that, and then maybe get back to something more philosophical that we vibe on.
I
Because I
bet.
listened
Yeah.
to your episode on metaphysics, dude. It was a primer, brother. It was a beautiful episode. Like, I
Appreciate
want to
that.
congratulate you on that episode. Okay, so first to start, do you mind if we talk about some TAC
Absolutely
vignettes
not.
and I get
Yeah.
your opinion on them? This is when I flip the script on it. Okay.
This is where we should just have this going forward
We can
as
neither.
the starting place of our conversation. Everything that stems from
Yeah,
this is the main pivot
yeah,
of the conversation.
right.
I don't know what
Let's
you're about to
just
say. I don't
let's
know if you're going to say something
no,
that's
no,
going
no,
to embarrass
right.
both of us or neither of us, or if it's going to embarrass friends of ours. Who knows, dude? Let's hope they don't listen to it.
No, okay. So, I don't know how many listeners know. Where do I start? I
TEC
don't
is
know
a
how many
wild
listeners
place. If
know.
anyone is listening and they don't know that, it's a
Yes.
very strange place.
Okay, so I don't know how many listeners know how proficient Nate Whitaker is at volleyball, but Nate Whitaker, some might say, is a volleyball fiend. Okay. And okay, maybe we're not talking like
I used to be more
Olympic
so
court
before I went to
level.
TAC. The longer I was at
There you
college,
go.
dude, the worse I got.
Okay, that relationship notwithstanding, I think that you're one of the best volleyball players I've ever known. So there was one memory, and I
Thanks.
hope you remember this, where I joined your co-ed
Oh yeah.
volleyball team, ostensibly a non-competitive volleyball team, and we would play at TAC, right? And I believe our first game was against the tutors, some
It
tutors at
was.
TAC.
That
Do you
was
remember this?
yes.
Take us back to Nate Whitaker as the volleyball captain of that team. And can you say something about what it felt like to be a captain, how it felt to get beat by the tutors, but then also how you dealt with me? Because I was an itinerant member of the team, I'll be honest. I played a couple games and
You
stopped.
were the least committal member of the team. No, that's not even fair.
Right.
We had a very non-committal team. All right, so the way TAC athletics works, there are actually no NCAA sports, nothing like that. There's just intramurals, and basically what they do is they just figure out who's decently good at sports throughout the year. Each intramural sport has about a month and a half devoted to it, and so in theory you can play all the sports. No tryouts, pretty low key. But they know they kind of keep tabs on who's good at different sports, and then they ask those people to be captains, and then they have a big draft at the start of every season, draft the teams, and then each captain's responsible for making practices, making sure their team shows up to games. So yeah, we had an interesting team. I'm 6'1", and I think I might have been the tallest person on the team. But you know what? The funny thing was, it was a fairly stacked team in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
But you were pretty good. You were pretty good at receiving.
It
I
was all
remember that.
right.
Now, you can't tell because he's sitting down, and this is a podcast. Aiden's not
Right,
exactly the tallest man.
right, right.
But
For any women listening, I'm tall probably enough, but I'm below average. I'll say that.
yeah, I'd say so. And I mean, he lives in Alameda. He's a great guy. He has a great family. He's Italian. He can cook. Pretty sure you can cook, right? I'm sure you cook.
The little sidebar. I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, exactly. So
Right.
height don't matter. Regardless, you were good at receiving though. You couldn't necessarily get up to spike, but you could dig pretty well. So I was like, all right, sick. We have a good receiver. We had a couple spikers on the team,
Hmm.
but then you just decided not to show up. And I don't think I ever gave you too much grief for that because there was
You did not.
no, because I understood. I was like, you know what, it's gonna be pushing the limits just to. I think I signed you up for volleyball and then drafted you because I just wanted you to come.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah.
I signed
You
you up for
actually,
football
you know
too, and
what?
you were freaked out.
You did. I was very freaked out about football.
Yeah.
Volleyball, I actually wasn't at first. I'm so glad you remember that. Dude, you did sign me up. And I want to say now on the record that I really appreciate that. Like, I still to this day have not had a friend that's signed me up for things. And you did it. Like, the only other person that's done that is maybe my mom when she would like sign me up for soccer and I didn't want
Yeah.
to. And I just remember those times where I was involuntarily signed up to do
I
things
tried to get you outside
were
your
actually
doom
really
so
good. Dude, you did.
yeah,
And you did. Like especially my second semester of freshman year,
yeah.
you got me out of my shell and I would not be who I am today if it weren't for
Appreciate that.
those months where Nate Whitaker got me out.
No, and you had a good influence on me by like recommending that I study sometimes and stuff like
Sure
that.
thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
No, we
Well,
studied together. We studied, but
I mean,
you
the
were
fruits of
definitely, I would say, more there for the academics than I was in a way, at
I
least
was the
early on it.
bookworm. I was the
You
bookworm
were
for
more of a
sure.
bookworm.
Yes. But see, there we go. Our friendship was perfect because we brought out the other sides of each other.
Yeah, actually, you made me a little
And
more
then
critical.
after, right? And then after I left, and I'm pretty sure it's, completely because of my doing, of course, that you succeeded at TAC. There's no other factor, of course,
No,
but I left and then you like blossomed, dude. And now I'm making it sound dramatic. You were always like, I think you were always very smart. You just enjoyed
I just
hanging out with other people more than I did
yeah, I think you were
then,
less of a people person,
at least then, which
and
is
I
crazy
was
because I
less
do
of a
think
book
I'm
person.
extroverted, but like, yeah, I don't know. We change throughout life. So,
But it was fun though. I mean, yeah, no, you definitely helped me see the value in setting time aside
right.
from the social aspects. Because TSC is also, in addition to being a very strange place, it's a very social place. It's a very
Indeed.
small school, which you might think makes for less of a social life, but there's actually kind of a spirit of you can hang out with people anytime you want. Everyone's friends with each other. It's like a weird big family, oversized family. So
Yes.
I think definitely my first year of college, I settled more into that side of things. And you from the start were definitely
Hmm.
on the book path, but then we both came
Yes.
together. So I really appreciate you. I'm trying to think of any crazy memories I have of you. You know what? I
Yeah.
remember we worked in the kitchen together. So there was a
Good. Yeah.
yeah, a lot of people at TSC, probably most of the students do work study. So to help pay for college, they do some kind of work, and there's all kinds of departments. There's the groundskeeping department. There's maintenance. There's things like plumbing, all kinds of things. There's even working development in the actual office at administrative jobs. But there's also the kitchen. Kitchen might
Mm.
be one of the more dreaded jobs for most students. Kind of, I mean, it depends on who you are. It depends. I think for you, you kind of enjoyed it, but once in a while, one of the jobs in the kitchen is cleaning up pots at the end of the night. So there's obviously tons of pots and pans that are just covered in grease, and it takes hours to get through them if you're going slow, if there's enough of them. But once in a while, we would do what's called a pots party. I think it happened the first time very organically. Like it was just a perfect night. There were way too many
Yes.
pots to get done. There were like you, me, and one other bro in the kitchen late at night, and you had a speaker, and
Yes.
we're like, guys, let's turn this into something fun. So describe for us a pots party and the
Oh my
playlist that went
goodness.
with it.
Which I still have, by the way.
Yeah, you do.
I
I've seen
still
it on your
have the
Spotify.
kitchen party playlist. So a pots party would begin anytime late at night when there were pots to do, right? And then it became us intentionally staying late in the
Yes.
kitchen when
We would
all the
host people
professional
eventually. We
chefs
started
left.
inviting people.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Now, here are the tenets of a real pots party. You need
The
Aiden's
tenants.
JBL
The
speaker.
dogma. Yeah.
You need Aiden's JBL speaker or some speaker that's sufficiently loud,
Yeah.
which I would bring, by the way, to clean the
JBL
fryers late
speakers are
at night,
incredible.
right?
Can we
Yeah,
just
there you go.
acknowledge that?
I have a massive JBL
Do you?
now
Do
that
you
I
have one of those
bring, and
boom
I bring it
boxes?
up almost, and I
Yeah.
bring it on my bike, and I bring it into my garage, little garage gym.
Fantastic.
Okay, so you have the speaker, you have the guys, and it has to be all guys because of the next tenet that I'm going to explain, which is that in the kitchen at a pots party, shirts are optional. Okay,
Yeah, see, there's a
shirts are
dress code at
optional.
TAC where you not only do you have to wear clothing, um, you have to wear modest clothing, and often you have to
Indeed.
wear very formal clothing. And under the surface, that promotes a little bit of a spirit of, come on, man, once in a while, let's just loosen up, take off some clothes, let's derobe a
Precisely.
little bit. And so, Pots
Precisely.
Party was where that happened. Keep
Yes.
going.
And so because at this semester, actually, there was an edict from somebody that you couldn't be shirtless on the running path around
Oh,
the
unbelievable. That
university.
was crazy.
Remember, which used to be like the haven for shirtless men running, you
Yes.
know? So where do we go? Well, we have an in the kitchen.
Hmm.
So you got speaker up, shirts off, guys only a few guys really. And then we were playing not rap music, not whatever. We were playing disco. We were playing
Yes.
Earth, Wind, and Fire,
A
right?
lot of
We were
Baba,
playing the
or
Bee
Abba.
Gees, ABBA, dude.
I said
And we
Baba.
would dance ourselves into a sweat until we were
Oh, yeah.
silly. And we would enjoy that moment. And
There's some photographic
it
evidence of
was,
this, which should probably never be leaked.
there is,
I remember we took
which
our
will
shirts
never
off
be
and we
leaked.
put the collars of our shirts over our heads. We kind of look like Ancient
My
Egyptians with like
goodness.
headdresses. You
We
remember that?
were
Yeah.
we were ancient Egyptians. We were ancient Egyptians. So that was a pots party, and I think of that time so fondly.
Yeah.
I recently I was at a dance at my church, and we just were dancing ourselves silly,
Yeah.
and it reminded me of those days because when you move your body to music,
Mm.
you realize that's part of what music is for,
That's part of
and we
what it's
dug
for.
that. What music is for is
Yes.
to
That's
dance
part of what
to.
our bodies are
It's
for
just
too, dude. It's in our nature. That's
astounding.
why Baptists miss out so hard. They ban dancing. But like the thing was, it
Yeah.
wasn't just we were dancing and having a good time, but we were productive. I think we were faster than
Yes.
we would have been if we were just putting away the pots in an orderly manner. Like we were
Way faster.
spraying those things down, we were scrubbing those things, we were drying them off, and we were putting them away while busting out the most wild moves and
The
being only,
most wild moves,
partly clothed. That
sliding
was
on
just
the
an awesome time.
floor.
There was a time when a group of girls came into the kitchen not expecting that. Do you remember that?
Right. I do. I believe they were some like sort of freshman initiates that
Yeah,
were
yeah,
coming in late from a shift.
a sizable batch, and they didn't
Yeah,
know it.
I don't know. I've never spoken to those young women since,
No,
and don't know what their impression of us was.
doesn't matter.
And it's all right, you know.
Hmm.
Now, if the Lord has a problem with that, I'm sure we'll hear about it in heaven. We'll hear about it on the last day. But I think we were probably, we were reasonably clothed. We're not doing any innate, we're
No,
not doing any crazy
no.
movements. They were just surprised, and I haven't spoken to them
They
since.
lingered for a little
That's
too
all
long.
right.
That was
A
unsettling.
little too long. Well, because a woman at TAC does not often see a man shirtless. So that's also a seminal
They are
moment for
starved.
some
They are
people.
starved. Yeah.
Right. For food, of course,
Yes,
because of
because it
the
was a
rationing
kitchen.
situation, which we haven't spoken about. Yeah,
Yes,
right, right, right.
right.
That we were given rations, of course, of course.
So, do you have other memories? Because
Yes,
do
I
you,
do. I mean, we can go on. I mean, we can go on about this, and at some point, we might want to get. I don't know what the listeners come to view, but hey, this is a Friends
I don't care,
episode.
man.
This is
I just
named
want to talk to
Friends.
you.
Okay,
If people are
so
listening to this, or if anyone listens to this or watches this, that's a win. If nobody does, I'm
okay,
just talking to you.
rock
So,
on,
yeah,
rock on,
pop off.
because I do think that there's something interesting in like recounting these memories, though, because I really like to hear friends talk about memories, especially because some of it's relatable, some of it's entertaining. And then there's also a deeper element, right? Like what we talked about with the volleyball memories, right? How having friends that have different proclivities is important. I
Hmm.
think that's a great thing to even remember. Anyway,
Yes, it's a good
okay,
moral.
more memories. We skipped Latin class once, okay?
You
Nate and I
skipped Latin
skipped
class once.
Latin
I skipped
class.
Latin class way too many times.
Okay, way too many
But
times.
sorry.
I skipped once Mr.
Yeah.
Kanofsky's Latin class. Latin was my least favorite subject at
Hmm.
TAC
You
just
were not
because I
alone.
wasn't as proficient at it, but I've since really returned to Latin in a big way and appreciated that education. But I believe it was our second to last or last Latin class of one of the semesters, and it was a stunning like day. We just put in the field at Thomas Aquinas College, the soccer field, soccer
Oh my
multi-purpose field.
gosh. Yeah.
Do you remember this day?
Yes.
And we arranged we're going to skip Latin class, okay? And we're going to take a frisbee
Yeah.
out to the field. And it gave me so much pleasure to have a friend who was good at throwing the frisbee. And we were just whipping it. We
Yeah.
were just having such a good time.
We were
And
just frolicking, dude.
we were frolicking. Okay. So you remember that? You remember this day, right?
Yes. I
Now,
remember where
what
our Latin
was,
class was.
well, okay. So describe to the people where we were frolicking in relation to where our Latin class was from, and then why that matters, like when Latin class eventually got out and our
Hmm.
classmates walked out of the classroom.
Yeah, I mean, the only big thing about TAC is the ego of certain people there. Otherwise, it's a very small place,
Yes.
very small population, very small campus. So at any given point, you're within like a stone's throw from any other point of the college, you know? You could be, I mean, you could be in the bathroom, dude, and the administrator in his office across campus. I mean, he could just look over his shoulder and see you in the bathroom. It's that small of a campus, dude. So where we were, the soccer field was, I think, just down a little hill from the classroom where we were supposed to be having class.
Hmm.
And it wasn't just a classroom building, but we were particularly in the classroom that was right on the end of that building, closest to us. And there was big old windows. And I think didn't our classmates all just walk out after class was
Hmm.
done? The class we should have been at. and just
Yeah.
walked right past us.
And they're all
And I don't remember if the
waving.
professor, they
Some
didn't
are,
care. Nobody really cares if you skip
I don't
class
know.
if you
Yeah, I
see, but
mean, it
like,
was the end of the year, but it was awkward to say the least for me as a people pleaser. I'm like, we're like over here, kind of, and hoping Mr. Kanufki didn't come out, which I don't think he did.
Knufky.
But I remember, some of our friends there, Ruben, Joe Letney, they were all, "What are you guys doing?" But see, it's precious when on a campus that is the recalcitrant behavior, right? Like
Mhm.
that's the bad behavior when people
That's
are skipping class to play frisbee. Like that was what encouraged me so much about that place. And even in hindsight, that memory, although we were dorky and we were skipping class
sure,
and everything,
sure.
we had such a good time. And also we made this memory that we
Yeah.
can like now bring. Anyway,
And a very wholesome
great,
memory, right?
very wholesome memory. Very wholesome.
Yeah.
Oh wow. That's a good
There's
time.
some interesting
A
people
lot of
there.
other,
Mr. Kanufki is a
yeah,
legend, but
yes. He'd be an interesting guest to have on a
he would
podcast
be.
because I have a picture of him holding a baby goat at one of our
That's
tutors'
insane.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. He's a fascinating gentleman. My goodness. Those are okay, those are wonderful. The volleyball, the kitchen parties, the skipping Latin class to throw frisbee.
Yeah.
I don't know if your audience or you to take any more memories, but there are a few memories that have to do with the field. Okay.
No, I can take some more,
But
dude.
there's also a memory about the senior dating competition.
Now,
And now
I don't know
I
if
know
we need
you're
to get
a
into this.
current, maybe we don't need to get into it, but I think it would
I'm
be
just kidding. I don't
helpful
care.
at least just to understand the relationship that our school had to dating and relationships because it's something you've talked about in a previous podcast.
Yeah.
And maybe this could dovetail with a conversation about relationships generally because you're in a loyal, like committed relationship.
Yeah.
And I say this honestly, you never were a man to treat women in any way like poorly. You went on a few dates, you had a couple experiences, and so did I. And they were all like fun, go out, go to a place, get food. At least that was my
Mhm.
impression.
You were only there for a year and a half, but yes.
There you go. Well, I didn't see how things changed.
I'm glad you had a wholesome
But there
impression.
was we in so many words, we can hopefully get your view on the senior dating competition. Did you start this, Nate? Can you describe to us what this
Yeah.
was and how it would never have happened on any other campus in the United States? Because every other campus thinks dating means, something physical, something intimate, something very like, but dating on TAC campus was purely getting to know someone and also having a fun experience. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on that?
Yeah. I mean, TAC is like a weird combination of ancient Athens and Jane Austen land or something like that. It's
Oh my
insane
gosh.
and very bizarre. And people approach dating with about the level of fascination that we think about colonizing Mars. So I'd say, that's a great question. Yeah, everything's very wholesome. It's a good place. Everybody
Hmm.
talks. Everybody's very curious and snoopy with each other's business, but that makes for anything romantic or even anything resembling romance to be a very fascinating thing. Happens in a lot of weird ways. Stuff happens
Well,
there that doesn't happen
how
anywhere
did
else.
the
Okay, this is just a
right, but
rule in general. Oh, sorry, what were we gonna say?
sure. No, no, no. How, but from that, how did this competition arise, and what were
Yeah,
your experiences in that? Okay,
right. Well, I was gonna say first of all,
sorry.
no, just in line with that, because you said this is the only place in the United States where this could happen. Yeah, there's a lot of things you could say about that happened at our school. Like you were bringing up earlier, fire drills. How would a fire drill transpire at your dorm?
Oh my
What did that
goodness,
look like?
I love this sidebar. Okay, fire drill, right? An official,
Official fire drill,
event,
official training for something that could
official
be life or death,
event
especially in California where there's fire
in
all the time.
Saint Junipero Sarah's dorm. When a fire alarm would go off, fire drill once a semester or so, everyone would get woken up. Okay,
Yeah,
togas and towels would be donned.
yeah,
Okay. Shirts would be strictly optional. And by optional, I mean almost non-existent.
yeah. Almost mandatorily not worn. Yeah,
Mandatory non-existent. Towels would be donned. We would be whooping and hollering to the dismay of the prefects,
yeah.
right? Trying to calm us down.
Dismay is a crazy word.
Someone would be carrying a bench. Someone would have a barbell. Someone would bring two
Hmm.
45-pound plates, right?
Yes.
Two 45-pound plates. On the fire road. Okay, we'd evacuate the dorm for the fire drill. Whooping, hollering, towels. Bench press goes down, barbell gets loaded,
Yeah.
someone starts benching, push-ups are happening.
Probably Max
It's
McCann.
probably Max McCann, I think, who's like a Catholic engineer or something now. That's what a fire drill would be. So you
Hmm.
have to imagine to call this campus idiosyncratic is an massive understatement. That's a fire. I mean, you would do that on a fire drill,
It was
like during a fire drill in the
idiosyncratic.
storm.
It was not just idiosyncratic.
Seriously,
Yeah.
idiosyncratic. It was indescribable.
Yeah.
So yeah, to say that this is a
So
unique
weird stuff
campus
happens
is
there on a daily
right.
basis. Stuff you wouldn't expect.
Hmm.
So what sounds ridiculous? A dating competition. Guess what? Ridiculous stuff happens there all the time. So I was a freshman, and I think I was talking with a number of freshman guys. We're like, you know what prompted it? Actually, one of the things that prompted it was there was one couple. Again, everybody talks, everybody keeps tabs, so people knew there was exactly in the whole school one freshman senior couple, which you and I are both aware of. It was
Yes, we know the
we
individuals. We know
observed
the
it. It was
individuals.
uncomfortable for everybody
Yes.
involved. It was uncomfortable for anyone in a 5 mile radius. But that being said, thank God that's over. And I would say because of that, there was some conversations about that. There was some people making jokes, and it's like, it'd be funny if we find a way to get more freshman guys going out with senior girls. Because the other way around, as evidenced by the people we were thinking about, the
Hmm.
senior guy with the freshman girl combo was a little bit uncomfy for everybody. But a senior girl, freshman guy, I mean, that's just a classic dream come true
Right.
for some freshman dudes. So I was like, it'd be funny is if we found some way to get a lot of freshman guys to just shoot their shot. So this is another insane thing that we had at TSC. Had this app called Slack, which if anyone doesn't know what Slack is,
Hmm.
it's basically like a social media where anybody can post, but you use it for large organizations or large institutions. So our entire school had this one social media account, which is insane to me to think. It's basically like a big Discord chat for the entire school. Anybody could post anything at any time and be seen by all the school, and people react. I remember that one girl who we were unfortunately both acquainted with, who every little while would post how tired she was of the guy dorms making so much noise late at night and keeping up the girls. Do you remember this?
Yes.
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 Yeah, exactly. We don't even need to get into who it was. You remember exactly. And I remember every reaction to that would be like, you'd have the most wild Instagram comment sections kind of reactions to those sort of posts. So one time, I just
Right.
go on Slack after this idea of trying to get more freshman guys to go out with senior girls as a joke, and I just post, "All right, guys, um, from here to the end of the semester," and I think I started this in like March. We're gonna have a
Yes.
freshman senior dating competition. Guys, keep track of this sounds so terrible. Keep track of how many senior girls you go on dates with, and then I put some various description for what counts as a date. It has to involve some
Hmm.
food. You have to spend some money. Ideally, you go
Hmm.
off campus. Actually, I think there was a scoring system, so you could have an on campus date, but it was much less points. Ideally,
Yes.
you have to go off campus, really go to a restaurant, have a good time. And then I also posted some sort of reward or prize you won if you were the winner of the competition.
Hmm.
And the reaction to that was incredible.
Astounding. Really.
The kind of reaction you wouldn't get any other college. All guys were all for it. All the freshman guys were for it. And the upperclassmen guys were like, that's a brilliant idea. We wish we would have had something like that when we were students or when we were freshmen. So yeah, at other colleges that would definitely be judged or be like, "Oh, this is misogynistic," but it was
Right.
hilarious at TSC
Right.
because anything goes there,
Well,
and it worked out. And I didn't even win, dude. There were some
no.
guys that there was one homie who what did he do? He like went on like 9 dates with seniors. So
Yeah.
it was an opportunity for guys to shoot their shot with girls who
Hmm.
they couldn't do that in a serious way, but like in a low key joking
Hmm.
way, they could get some one on one
Yes.
time with some senior girl.
Yes. And I'm so glad you shared all that detail about it because now, sure, some people listening might judge us for this. Okay, who cares?
Who cares, dude?
If you understood, like, if you understand, just put on the TAC cap, the Thomas Aquinas College cap for a second, and taken into your mind how unique this campus is. What you did, Nate, was it was really about like friendship, genuinely.
Hmm.
And the people that I went out with, the memories that I had from those times,
Yeah, you went out
going
with a
out with
number of
these
them.
two senior girls, you, myself, and a good friend of ours, Lucas Lundstrom, went out.
Oh
with
yeah,
two lovely
100%.
girls, one of which I'm still in contact with now as a friend. And it really you facilitated a lot of interaction that was important, I think, really was. Because sometimes it's daunting as a young freshman guy, talk to the
Sure.
senior girls. When there's a competition, the way we all interpreted that on campus was not competitive in terms of we're going to try and break people's hearts or we're going to try and get people's hopes up,
Well, there's nothing particularly
but
serious
really,
about it. That's part of what
no.
made it easy.
And no one bought into the fact that it was to mess with people's emotional state. It was purely an avenue to get to know people in sort of an unconventional way,
Right.
right? So I look upon that really fondly. And I genuinely, at the time and even now, admired how bold you were and admired that you facilitated that.
Hmm.
Honestly, so many good memories of that
Yeah.
time.
No, it was a great opportunity for a lot of freshman guys, and I think, and a lot of them capitalized on that. So, uh, as raw of a wording as that may sound, so yeah, it was all wholesome. That's the thing. It was like you said, it was kind of a friendly thing. It was just okay. Look, it's kind of a joke. It's an opportunity to just go one on one, have a nice meal, have a nice dinner, and it was awesome. I think guys really enjoyed it. So I'm
Yeah.
glad you brought that up. I completely forgot that even happened,
Yeah.
but
Well, it was a good moment. And I think that we could totally, I don't think we sound misogynistic, but I think that it's just important to recognize that there are different types of friendships
yeah,
that can happen. I remember you had an episode talking about can girls and guys be friends?
right.
And I think some ways the answer to that is both, at least in my mind, like both yes and no,
Hmm.
right? And part of it is if you treat people virtuously, if you treat people with genuine love, I don't think much bad can happen. And what happened in that instance was, in many cases, exactly that. Like, people really tried to see each other, to see God in each other. And by facilitating a date that was low stakes, but that
Hmm.
was still a date, it wasn't just two friends, but it were two people who wanted to be friends, wanted to
Right.
get to know each other better. You either wittingly or unwittingly brought about a lot of new friendships, I
Yeah.
think, in that moment. You really did.
Well,
And
praise
I don't know
God.
if we have that so much in like our culture nowadays. The dating climate is interesting, to say the least.
Yeah.
Um, and we were in a unique place and time. So
It is, and I think it's what's interesting is that like here's maybe a way we could pivot from just reminiscing to something that I would like to get your thoughts on. I think we often in order to reject the secular culture's approach to dating, where dating is, like you said, very physical. It's primarily physical. It's just about, all right, there's someone that you want to make out with or you want to have sex with. And so you kind of get through the early get to know you steps as quickly as possible. And then you get to that, you hook up. Basically, it's just dating is just another manifestation of hookup culture extended a little bit.
hmm
Or you have situationships where there's a lot of vagueness and a lack of commitment and everything is very come and go, very uncertain, often intentionally so, right? And so, with all those things, all those ideas of lack of commitment and hookup culture and sort of using people mainly for physical pleasure, I think we as Catholics and as Christians, or in your case as Orthodox, are very correct to want to react and say we need to do things differently. We need to be committed. If you're not, you shouldn't just mess around
hmm
with a relationship, and you shouldn't go into a relationship for lustful reasons. You should do it for very pure intentions and actually willing the good of the other, seeing some good in the other person, and wanting to commit to it. But all that said, I think that spirit of reaction can sometimes make good guys. I don't know what it's like for girls, but from guys' perspective, I think it can make some guys overly idealize what a relationship should look
hmm
like and be very reluctant to actually commit to one because they're like, look, I know I don't want to enter into something non-committal. I know I don't want to
hmm
enter into anything for the wrong reasons. So it's got to be perfect. It's got to feel like the right moment. I got to pray a ton before doing it. I got to discern it. I got to make sure she's
hmm
the perfect girl, and I got to make sure all my
hmm
intentions are pure and that I do everything perfectly and that I'm like the greatest guy possible. I'm saying this because I've seen this in my experience that like a lot of guys, even at the college we were at, there were very, very few guys that were of the side more on the secular culture, like the hookup culture side. the vast majority were very wholesome, very solid guys who know what dating is. They know it's for marriage ultimately. But because of that, they'd almost get too intimidated by it. So they'd already be thinking
Mm,
about marriage, already be thinking about having 5 kids before they even ask a girl on a first date. And that could actually paralyze some guys where they're like, look, I can't even
yes.
ask a first date because I haven't prayed about it enough, or I don't know if she's perfect. What are your thoughts on that? Do you ever see anything like that, or have you ever felt, um,
Mm.
I don't know, similar sentiments?
Firstly, that's a wonderful pivot. That's a brilliant pivot. I like how you brought that memory, those memories we were sharing into this, because I think in a way, like all of the memories we were just talking about, as silly or as fun as they were, kind of all had at their root something about relationships, something about human relationships. And in each of those moments, we were sort of getting to know each other as friends and getting to know other people. I love what you say, and I completely agree. There's this mystery about relationships. Like, how does someone become known from unknown? Like, how did that happen? I say it's a mystery because it's one of these things that happens in an emergent way. It just kind of develops as a, like we are talking about the process of salvation.
Yeah.
There's a process of knowing somebody. And when it comes to romantic relationships or relationships with the opposite sex, there's this interim, liminal, in between, however you want to say, time between not knowing someone and knowing them, not dating and dating, or dating and marriage, right? And how do you properly, as a Christian, ford those gaps, right? How do you go between those stages? Because dating someone is very different than being married to them.
Right.
And just being a friend with someone is very different than dating. And there are pitfalls on either extreme, right? If you're overly zealous about the dating thing, or if you're overly zealous about the freedom kind of side of it,
Yeah.
you get caught up. And I totally agree with that. So something that we think unknowingly did at our school, and maybe it's worth even trying more in our lives for those that are single, thinking and praying genuinely about situations in which you can come to know somebody in such a way that the pressure isn't there, right? This idea
Yes.
that, like, you can get to know someone in the purest sense organically, right? Be able to ask the right questions, hear the right things, genuinely listen to someone, be receptive, and also like bring out in them what you want to know and then share yourself accurately to them as
Mhm.
well. It's so complicated to get to know somebody.
It is.
But yes, there is this immense gap between like the dating and marriage, or getting to know someone and marriage,
Mhm.
that is difficult to ford. But I think the church has something there, right? The church has a way of tackling that, but it's not what the world pushes, right?
Yeah.
The world is more about self-centeredness, whereas I don't know what you'd say to this. I think the church's way is about being other-centered,
Mhm.
fundamentally.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think the church's ways are reflective of the Trinity. Obviously, the Trinity is the centerpiece of every belief that the church has. And our lives and the way in which we share our lives with other people and the way in which we love is supposed to be a participation of the Trinity. It's supposed to be a reflection of the life of the Trinity. And every member of the Trinity is totally other centered, right? Like every person of the
Mm,
Trinity is focused on the other. The Father is enamored with the Son. The Son is in love with the Father. The Holy Spirit is, the impulse that comes from that spiration, that love that joins the two of them together. It's the whole relationship is other centered. And so
yes.
I guess it's sort of a tangent, but I think it is relevant because our lives are supposed to reflect the Trinity, and especially our
Yeah.
the way in which we love during our lives, whether it's romantic or as a
Mm-hmm.
friend or even just charity. It's supposed to be other centered. 100%, I agree with that. But
Mm-hmm.
what's hard is knowing how you balance other centered love and other centered attention with a proper treatment of the self, and how the two of you come
Right.
together. That's part of what I think makes romantic love a challenge and intimidating for people that are approaching it, is that you see a good in the other person and you might want something good for them when it's really a
Mm,
good, well-intended love, not just lust, but when it's actually pure love. You see something good about the other person, you want something good for them, but you have all sorts of questions about joining that other to you yourself, because you yourself may
Mm.
feel inadequate, or you might feel some sort of, divergence between your values or the ways in which you view the world, or the ways in which, okay, yeah, maybe I care about them a lot, but our personalities aren't compatible, or I just don't feel like we agree on enough things, whatever it might be. That process of like taking the self and uniting it to the other is very complicated because, yeah, there's all kinds of things we might see that are good in another person, but we might recognize that it's not good for us, or vice versa.
Can I ask you about how, in your experience, because you're in a relationship now, out of the two of
Right.
us, how you found that relationship between your own personal, what maybe spiritual development or something, but then the development of the relationship between you and your partner? How have you found that? How have you navigated that?
Navigated just the balance of.
Yeah, like you said, the balance between like wanting to get your own house in order, so to speak,
Mhm.
while also building something between your girlfriend and
Right.
you, right?
Well, one thing I think is cool is that in a very healthy relationship, you should actually come to self-knowledge through getting to know the other
Mm.
person. And that's what's
Hmm.
really cool is you see in yourself things, whether it's good things or bad things, maybe flaws that you need to work on, but you see new things about yourself when you're seeking after somebody else and trying to pursue somebody else's good. And when two people are doing that together, they can learn a lot about themselves. And I think embracing that and not being afraid of the fact that that might cause some hurdles or miscommunications or disagreements along the way is really healthy, just out of the gates. Just to know, like, yeah, you might agree intellectually about a lot of things, you might feel attracted to them, you might feel a lot of ways of compatibility, but you're not the same person, and so there's going to be sooner or later some reckoning of your differences. And I think that's, like, we don't need to be afraid of that. Like, that's itself is a gift. That's one of the beauties of a relationship, is learning that you can explore another human being, what their life is like, what their ways of communication are, how they need to be loved. You can explore that and do your best to provide that, and like respond in a good and loving way. And I think sometimes people get intimidated by relationships because maybe deep down inside they're a little bit afraid of that process of exploration,
Mm.
whether they're afraid that it is too vulnerable, or they're afraid that they could get their heart broken, or they're afraid that, rejection or disappointment or any kinds of things that could just be discouraging. Um,
Mm.
that can sometimes hold us back, especially when we're jumping the gun, right? Because I think we can jump the gun and jump from A to Z, where this is a thing I think that definitely happens among a lot of good Catholic guys. Is, like I said before, if we're seeking dating for the right reasons, we know its purpose. We know the end of dating properly should be marriage. But then the problem is, intellectually, we can, as soon as we're interested in some girl, a lot of guys do this. I know a lot of guys at TSC would do this. Whenever I had a number of guys that would confide in me whenever they had an interest in a girl and they want to ask her out. And to be honest, like, it was very frequent that these kind of guys would bring up what it'd be like to be married to this girl. And that's good in a way because it's acknowledging the purpose of dating. But the problem is you can already be then in your mind worried about the logistics of marriage, or what it'd be like to have kids with this person, or how compatible you're going to be in 10 or 20 years, when in fact you haven't even asked this person on a first date yet.
Mm.
That's kind of
Mm.
skipping
Mm.
steps in a way that can cause, I think, too much anxiety sometimes, unnecessarily.
Mm.
But
Yeah,
that
I
was very
appreciate
long-winded.
that.
I just.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that answer. There's a lot there. I think sounds like what you're saying is that there's a level of humility there has to be in any
Yeah.
relationship, and a level of understanding. What it seemed like you were saying is that you'll never be completely content with yourself
Yeah.
or the other person. There's always an element of the relationship that is still developing and that's imperfect because we are imperfect. But it also sounds like, in what you're saying, that in any good relationship, there's enough that redeems it. And ultimately, that's like being Christ-centered too.
Yeah.
If you're other-centered and Christ-centered in the relationship, that's the pearl at the center of
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
that helps you recognize, like, yeah, we mess up. Like, we're so imperfect. We fall every hour
Hmm.
sometimes, and even in a relationship. But to not leave something that's imperfect
Right.
because you're imperfect. I mean,
Hmm.
we are all. So that was very, I appreciate that response a lot. Very It's difficult, man. Human relationships are some of the most difficult
Yeah,
things
what's your
to
experience been
navigate.
like in that? Yes, mine.
I think it's been eye-opening, but difficult in some
Yeah.
ways. To be candid, I think in the past, and there are still hinges of it now, when I'll think of, maybe a girl that I'd like to get to know or something, like there's an element of putting onto that person what should be on to God,
Hmm,
right?
yeah.
And that was a problem in the past for me, and in a way still is a temptation to want to make something essentially into an idol. That's a temptation maybe more people feel too. I don't know. That's been an aspect of my relationships with people. And so one area, a huge area of spiritual growth I've been trying to pray about and work through is that like how to know what is that person's, what needs to be their space, what needs to be their relationship to God. But then how much am I supposed to be invested in their life? Am I supposed to care about their spiritual development? How much? How much am I supposed to be in their business? Also, what's private, what's not private. And so that's something I've been continually navigating and really praying about in a serious way. Like, God, help me enter this relationship with this other person, whether it's a female or a guy. Like, help me enter that relationship in such a way that I'm not going to put onto them what really should be you on you, right? And between us. So that is man, I mean, perennial for me, genuinely.
Yeah.
And thanks for asking that. It's difficult, sure.
What kind of prayer do you think needs to go into considering dating somebody? Because
Mm,
obviously when it comes to our vocations, there's a lot of discernment that needs to be happened, and we need to pray, say, before considering becoming a monk or a priest. And it obviously makes sense you need to pray and
hmm
ask God's will before you get married, but what are your thoughts on even praying and discerning before even taking the
mm,
first shot,
mm,
asking a girl on a date? Do you think that needs to happen, or in your experience, has that been helpful, or what do
hmm
you think?
I'll answer this in a very universal way because I don't have as much experience with dating as maybe some other guys, and I don't purport to be like a spiritual counselor. But what I'll say
No, you're a
is
sensei, come on.
what I'll say is in my experience, what I would advise anyone if I were in their position, right? Or what I would do. I think that going into any relationship, the simple prayer before you even meet somebody is something that not many people think about, I think, and I didn't think about for a while. Like praying to God, genuinely praying, and by praying doesn't mean like saying the words, right? Genuinely meaning the words.
Mhm.
Something like, Lord, I pray that I recognize and see the people you want me to see in my life, right? I pray that you bring the right people into my life and that I will notice them at the right moment. That prayer for someone who's maybe you don't even know yet, right? Prayer for a friend you haven't met, prayer for a spouse that you haven't met. Praying that God will make your heart receptive to those people.
Yeah,
Man, I think that's an important prayer.
yeah,
That's a powerful prayer. I believe it because it's a prayer of like preparing yourself.
yes.
Yes, it's other centered, but it's also a self-focused prayer too.
Mhm.
It's like, make my heart open to,
Yeah,
to people and help me to see. Because some people don't even, I mean, I don't even, right? Like, there are people that God has probably put into my life that I could have served or helped
right.
and didn't because I was spiritually asleep,
Mhm.
right? Like in the temple asleep. And so that's one prayer. That's what I'll answer because there's more I could say, but that's something that I would say.
No, that's huge. I think not only does that give an opportunity for grace, because God does answer our prayers, as Christ says, "Ask and you shall receive." And so not only does praying that like give the opportunity for God to reward that prayer and give us some grace that will dispose us to be more receptive and to be a healthier companion to whoever he puts in our lives. But also it just puts us in the right frame of mind, right? Because as soon as you say that prayer, and especially you say that prayer on a regular basis, no matter what your words you use, you're going to be in the psychological frame of mind of thinking, I'm prepared and I'm preparing myself day by day to meet whoever God has in store for me.
Yes.
Romantically or just in terms of friendship, you're preparing to meet Christ in another person. And
Yes.
I think being in that frame of mind, like you said, in contrast to being asleep in the temple, is just an act. It's like an action of being awake, having your eyes open. And it's not only good for relationships, it's just good for the whole spiritual life. Like we want to be spiritually awake. Um, yeah, I think it was G.K. Chesterton commented on if you look at icons of the saints, and obviously your church has a lot of sick icons.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at icons, their eyes are always wide open. It's very different from other religions. The holy art of other religions, say the Buddha in Buddhist imagery, his eyes are shut, he's totally serene, he's cut off from the world. But in Catholic icons, or Orthodox icons, the saints are always wide awake. Their eyes are wide open. They're clearly alert, attentive. They're looking for every opportunity that God has to give them grace. And so I think practicing that in a relationship, like, okay, Lord, I ask that you prepare me and keep me awake for whoever you want me to meet as a friend or as a romantic partner. That's just like a good practice for then being awake to any opportunity of grace that God sends our way, whether it be an opportunity
Mm-hmm.
to serve Him in the poor, or an opportunity to fast in some new way, or an opportunity to explore some new form of prayer. So, yeah, thank you. That's beautiful. I need
Yeah.
to,
I think this is what we were meant to talk about from the beginning, truthfully.
yeah,
I know that I had ideas of like what a conversation with Nate would be like, and I know we'll have many more after this too, even over the phone, but I think this is something that it's a necessary conversation to have with friends like
yes,
yourself. And also, I do hope this is of some value to anyone who listens to this because, well, how to know a person, there's a book I'm reading actually right now with that exact title, is like we talked about the mystery of like a relationship and how to become friends with someone or how to become really know someone. There's a need, I think, in the culture, both the Christian and secular culture, at least in my humble opinion, right? That like we want to be seen and heard, but we also need to be good at seeing and hearing others. I mean, and not that that's like the entirety of the spiritual life, but I don't know, it's a lot, I think,
it is.
because how you speak and hear and how you listen to others, that you do that every day.
Yeah.
And I think those are sort of the building blocks of most morality. I think like morality in many ways, it can be thought of about like, to be following rules, and having imperatives and having laws. There's also an element of morality that's very commonplace, right?
Mhm.
How do you listen to somebody? Like, how do you speak to someone when no one's watching,
Right.
right? Like, that surely is part of morality too.
Yeah.
It's not always about
Oh,
following.
absolutely.
Like, and because by doing those everyday actions, you're still following some law, some eternal law,
Hmm.
but it's in your being in a different way. Does that make sense? Like,
Yeah, no,
I don't know if that makes, yeah.
it totally does. I think you just capture the spirit of the law, right? Because the
Mm,
second commandment, the second greatest commandment that Christ gives us is love your neighbor as yourself.
hmm
And as he and other prophets have pointed out, that one principle contains all of the law and the prophets. It contains the Decalogue, it contains every good thing that you see from the Old Testament, every good thing that you see in the New Testament with regard to treating other people
hmm
a certain way.
hmm
It's all captured in love your neighbor as yourself. And yeah, what does that look like? Well, for one thing, look at how you love yourself or how you want to be loved. Like you said, you want to be
Yes.
seen, you want to be known, and you want to be loved. And you want all those together. You don't want to be loved through some ignorance. You don't want other people to love you or appreciate you because they just don't know you well enough and they haven't seen your flaws.
Yes.
But no, you really want to be seen for who you are, good parts and bad parts, and then known in that reality. And then still loved and sought as a good thing. And so if that's how we want to be
Yes.
loved, then when Christ says love your neighbor as yourself or as you yourself would want to be loved, then you turn that around and say, okay, how can I see other people? How can I know other people and get to know them better? And then how can I love them through
hmm
that? Imperfections and all, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's crazy because
Yeah,
I don't think it'd be an overstatement, like you said, to say that this is one of the biggest aspects of the whole spiritual life, because this is just fulfilling that duty to neighbor.
right. And okay, so let's progress on this because I wanted to talk to you about metaphysics eventually and how your episode on metaphysics was brilliant. Your episode on metaphysics was just a beautiful primer, honestly. because it dovetails with this. And I like our conversation is kind of like, if you think about like ascending, right? We had like the
Yeah.
memories, then we had the relationships, and now okay, so there's a deep like philosophical theological element. Like I don't think, like you said, it's an understatement, because when we see others and when we know others, Parker Palmer, this Quaker educator, I think he writes a book called, it's either How to See or How to Know as We Are Known. Like this idea that like as God knows us, how do we come to know ourselves as God knows us and know others as God knows them? Okay, so if we take this notion, now bring in metaphysics, right? Metaphysics is about being, right? You talked about esse, right? To be, but then what does it mean to be an ens, right? It's something about having the action of being and then also the essence of being, okay? I think in some sense when you get to know somebody, you're oddly like you're grasping at that, right? You're grasping at one, the essence of them,
Mhm.
right? Like their humanity or something, right? What makes you similar to them. You're also grasping at their like their essay, right? Like
Yeah.
what it is to be them in that this Sitzenleben, the
Right.
German word, right? What it means to be them in their situation in life, right? Their individual instantiation of life. Okay, I know this is going on, but the one other element that, and I want to hear what you think about this. Then bring in the other element of metaphysics, being, right? What is it to know a person and to see a person? It's to see them first and foremost as existing,
Yeah.
as being. And so loving or knowing, seeing a person is ultimately to affirm their being and by extension your being. And then I think further to affirm God's being in them
Mm.
in some sense, right? So that's why I don't think it is an overstatement to say that the skill of knowing another or the gift of understanding, or there's a German word, Herzensbildung, which means training one's heart to see the full humanity in others, right?
Mm.
That is in some sense a fundamental spiritual discipline, and that it has a metaphysical import because you're seeing another's being at qua being, right? Qua human or something.
Yeah. No, I think that's great because it's basically the way you're saying to love an ends is not only to, if an ends is made up of an essentia and the essay, or for anyone who didn't hear our metaphysics episode, for a particular being is something made up of both an essence, their nature, their species, like in our case, human, and also our particular existence, the act of existing. So to love a particular human being is, yeah, to love, number one, their essence, something that you share in common with them, but also loving something that you don't have in common with them, which is their particular act of existence, which is different from yours. And so, yeah, I love that what sets them apart from you is that essay, the fact that they do exist and that it's not the same as your existence. Because really, I mean, we know this, Thomas Aquinas talks about this early in the Summa, that existence or being is the same thing as goodness. Goodness is just a way of conceiving or considering existence itself. So that's why we say God is preeminently good. It's because he is being itself, and therefore his goodness is just who he is. So with other particular people, that's the first origin of love, because love is basically just the intellect and the will responding to a perceived good. That first impulse of love comes from recognizing a good in another person, which is really ultimately just the same thing as recognizing their existence or
Mm,
some aspect of their existence. And so I like that you said that. Like the first thing you have to acknowledge to love somebody is just that they are, and then
hmm.
it's a kind of a continual process of discovering more and more what they are and who they are and what they're like. But first of all, you
Yes.
need to start with recognizing and seeing that they are. And
Hmm.
that to some people that might sound like a moot point or almost a non-point, because it's like, well, of course,
Hmm.
duh. In order to
Right,
have a
right.
relationship with somebody, you have to see them and acknowledge that they're a living,
Yeah,
breathing human being. But I think there's
yeah.
actually is something profound there in that we can spend much of our lives, at least I've done this, sort of going through the motions of routine and habit and interacting with a lot of people, passing by a lot of people, but almost not treating them as
Hmm.
real existences. I don't know if you've ever done this, where it's
Hmm.
sometimes it's you get in your own world, and not through negligence, not through narcissism, but simply because you have your stuff you need to get taken care of for the day. You have your busy schedule. You have stuff you're worried about, and you have your friends that you want to interact with, and then everybody else is sort of like an NPC in a video game. Like you're one of the characters, and they're just sort of floating in the background. And when
Mm-hmm.
you, as long as you view a person that way as sort of an NPC or just a background character, you're never going to be able to actually love them.
Yes.
And like, to become like, I don't know if you've experienced this way. For me, friendship sometimes when you're in a big environment like a college where there's tons of people around and they're all kind of each doing their own things and your worlds come within reach of each other, but they never actually overlap. As long as that's
Mm-hmm.
happening, they're sort of again background characters. But then having a
Mm-hmm.
friendship or beginning a friendship is sort of like the feeling of reaching out into that crowd, that
Mm.
sort of crowd of many vague faces, and then drawing someone in and having a particular relationship and really acknowledging someone's distinct
Mm.
existence from a crowd. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's like,
Yes.
wow, like that's happened to me before, where it's like, wow, I kind of didn't know how cool of a
Mm-hmm.
person you were. Like I'll have this when I have a friendship, and you get to know the person, you discover how amazing they are, how good of a personality they have, and you say to yourself, wow, before this, I didn't know you. I can't believe I didn't know you because you were
Mm.
sort of just part of the background. But now I acknowledge your
Right.
particular existence. And I think to love people as friends and as romantic partners, you have to certainly do that. But even to love people with true charity, we need to have
Mm-hmm.
a healthier approach to the quote unquote crowd of acknowledging that it's not just a bunch of NPCs, but every human being is a
Mm-hmm.
particular experience of existence and it's worth love.
Yes. Yes. That's I love that. I love it. I'm glad we ended up on this topic because for people in our stage of life, and even for people not, we're very self-focused.
We
The
are.
college years, the after college years, at least in my experience. Yeah, I guess it seems like you relate to that. And it's always about, what am I going to do to either enrich myself, maybe in a good way, right? To support family or to
Right.
support myself, to become independent. How am I going to actualize my potential or whatever? And,
Yeah.
and like it becomes an imperative, right? Like to do what is best for the self. And we almost follow that directive automatically, right? The body, almost biology takes care of
Yeah.
that, right? We just by
It's like
default
an extension of
are
our
self,
survival instinct.
yeah, right? Because like at least I don't know if this would be Thomas Aquinas' argument, right? But like by default, we try to encourage our own life
Yes.
unless we're insane, right? Or suicidal. And so that's almost evidence for the fact that we by default like tend towards life, at least in our
Right.
sorry. Um, but then this idea of seeing life in other people is not a moot point, like you said, because it's not as simple as do I see with my eyes that this person is existing? No,
Yeah.
it's not that. Of course we see. But when Jesus, I think, commands this idea, I like how you're saying about bringing out of the crowd, right? Pulling out people and noticing them. It's like when Jesus says, whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. He's saying something, it seems to me like the people that your attention does not gravitate towards, right? The people that you tend not to notice those people, right? It's this idea of knowing someone. Like
Wow.
the
Yeah.
people who you don't know, the people who aren't salient to you, make them salient in your life,
Hmm.
right? It's radical still, and it's not the social justice, it's not the whatever modern. It's the way love has always been, which is to recognize
Yes.
something that's not recognized and then to bring it to the forefront, right? To really get to know what it means to be someone's particular being,
Yeah.
what it's be like. I have the book next to me. I'm going to show it to you. But anyway,
Yeah.
David Brooks.
Okay.
Okay. How to Know a Person is what the book is called. I've been thinking about it a lot as we've been talking. He makes the argument a person is a point of view. To be a person is to have a point of view on the world.
Yeah.
So therefore, if you want to get to know a person, you have to get to know what it's like to have their point of view.
Mm.
So
That's
and
why
there's a lot there,
dialogue is
but
so interesting. And the whole concept
yes,
of dialectic, people engaging, especially on intellectual matters, you have two minds, two points of view coming together and sort of bouncing off of each other and both walking away influenced by the other, right? It's
yes,
crazy. And we were blessed to go to TAC where all the classes are structured with a Socratic method, where the whole time what you're doing is exactly what you said, which is getting to know other human beings through their point of view, where you're wrestling with the material, you're wrestling with the
mm-hmm,
subject matter, not through a lecture, but through every person having the opportunity to share their own thoughts and hear the thoughts of the people
mm-hmm,
around them. So
mm-hmm.
We saw that in a classroom
Mm-hmm.
setting, but it's just kind of the beauty of relationships in general that, yeah, you have to see the other person's point of view to
Yes.
really acknowledge their
Mm-hmm.
existence, and you have to acknowledge their existence to really love them. I think this is why
Mm.
communication can make or break a relationship. Bad communication
Mm-hmm.
or just lack of communication more than anything can destroy a relationship. It can destroy the health of a relationship, whether it's a friendship or a marriage. But then good
Mm.
communication, just like the regular concerted effort to see the other person's point of view, even if it's not something that you like, that's what helps you
Mm.
actually love the other person.
Mm.
That's a basic principle of
Yeah.
philosophy. You can't love what you don't know. And as long as you're only
Yes.
as long as you're just scratching the surface of it,
Yeah.
maybe avoiding communication altogether or avoiding the other person's point of view, you're never really knowing them, so you also can't really
Yes.
love them.
Right. You can't love what you don't know, and you can't know what you don't love.
Yeah.
Right. That's wonderful. Right. Do you think, I know it's dangerous to speak analogously with God, not everything works by analogy, but do you think that what we're saying might also have some import in how we imagine our relationship to God? Because
Yeah.
in some sense, if loving is trying to understand a point of view of another with no judgment, with like true other-centeredness, maybe this relates to what we were saying earlier about prayer, right? Like that prayer in some sense is trying to maybe understand God's point of view,
Yeah.
right? Like prayer is trying to put ourselves in the most like humble position, in the best posture to see ourselves from God's point of view,
Mhm.
which is then how we love God. Because if we love other people by trying to get into their point of view, we love God by trying to understand, like, Lord, how is it that you see us? And ultimately that's going to direct how we live.
Mhm. Yeah, I think prayer is us striving to participate more fully in God, whether in
Mm,
God's wisdom, in God's love. And the Catechism says it's the lifting of the heart and the mind to God. And so I think,
mm,
yeah, in doing that, what
mm,
you're doing is trying to see God's point of view. Now, of course,
mm,
his ways are infinitely above ours, and it's not like his intellect works in the same way ours does through
right.
reason. But in a way, yeah, we are trying to tap into that. I think every time we pray, or we should be at least.
Mm,
That's why
mm,
it should be that should be kind of a proper approach that guides the particular prayers we use. Is that ultimately what we're trying to do is see God's point of view and commune with Him. I think the word
mm,
communion is actually such a beautiful word. The longer I've thought about it, it's just that union with, right? Because
mhm.
cum, obviously in Latin, it just means with another person. That union
Yes.
with another person. That's the whole mystery of life. Whether it's going back to the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, Adam saying, "Look, I have myself and I'm good, but I want to be with someone else," and God recognizes it's not
Yes.
good for man to be alone. He ought to be in communion with another person.
Right.
Going back to the Adam and Eve, but
Right.
then go farther forward throughout the whole history of mankind, marriage and friendship, all the worthwhile things that we see, all the worthwhile forms of relationships, they're good because they draw a person into communion, where it is one person being united with another. It's the self being united with the other,
Mm,
and then most of all, we have Holy Communion, right? When
mhm,
God gives us himself and God communes with us so that we are
mhm.
united with him and he's united with us. And
Yes.
it's really interesting while we're talking about this is sort of another tangent, but I kind of like throwing around tangents with you. I would
Of
love to hear your
course.
thoughts on this. A priest once said in a talk that I heard that the opposite of addiction. Well, let me ask you, what would you guess the opposite of addiction would be?
Ooh.
If you had to think of like a term that kind of describes like the state of not being
Oh, like a
an addict.
okay, because I was just gonna go Aristotelian. Non-addiction is the opposite
Yeah,
of
yeah, sorry.
addiction, but that's
Not Aristotle's idea of opposite.
right. I'm curious, what was the answer this priest gave?
Well, I would have guessed sobriety because he was like kind of
Okay.
asking the whole group,
Right.
like, what do you think the opposite would be? I
100%.
I would guess that. Because people say
Yes.
like, oh, I've been this many years sober from alcohol, so I'm overcoming my addiction. But he said,
Yes.
actually, the opposite of addiction is communion.
Oh.
Communion with other people, communion with God. Basically, addiction itself and any sin that accompanies that, it's an outflowing of loneliness and it's an outflowing of feeling disintegrated and feeling like you are
Ah.
not united with another. It's when yourself is kind of
Ah.
left by itself. But he said, if you really want to overcome
Ah.
that and not just be constantly resisting it or trying to white knuckle your way through some struggle, whether
Mm,
it be an addiction or a vice or any struggle. The way to do that is actually to strive for communion with God and with other people. But I would
wow.
love to hear your thoughts on that.
Wow. I really like that. I resonate with that too. I mean, addiction has not been a facet, at least in the alcoholic sense, in
Right.
my life. That's normally what we think about it, substance addiction.
Sure.
But yeah, addiction is symptomatic of a spiritual deficit. That is so wise, I think, what that priest said. The opposite of addiction is communion. Yeah, well, because it's about the what do you join yourself to?
Yes.
What do you love?
Right.
And addiction is in some sense about loving something that isn't God, about loving something that isn't the highest, and it's about loving something that maybe is yourself or that ultimately is not connected to being.
Yeah.
To go back to the metaphysical element of this whole idea of like back from the memories we were talking about at TAC to the friendship to now it's like there's a metaphysical element which is the distinction between being and not be and non-being. Like in some sense, addiction then is affirming some kind of non-being,
Yes.
right? Like that addiction
Yeah.
is about, and then similarly, to not know somebody, to not see somebody, to not love somebody is to live on the non-being side,
Mhm.
not the being side.
Right.
It's not about becoming more religious. It's about being more alive
Yes.
and
Existing on a higher
affirming your
level.
own. Yes. And the whole idea of like following the religious rules, the rules are there to get us to be more truly. So I 100% agree. And then communion is the positive version of that. Like,
Mhm.
how do you affirm your own being in God's being? It's like, well, to one ingest, right?
Yeah.
Eucharistically,
Right.
you are what you eat. Eating is what promotes being and what promotes life.
Right.
But then spiritually, right? Like Saint Fotini, the woman at the well, right? Like having the water that
Yeah.
you never thirst from, right?
Right.
That's the liturgy. That's the mass. It's consuming the body and the blood, the water, the bread that feeds your soul.
Yeah. Dude,
Yeah,
incredible. I love that insight you had
I love
because
it.
that's just the idea of that contrast between being and non being, back to that, I think is spot on.
Mm,
Because, yeah, Christ never says in John chapter 10, I was thinking of a verse he says, he doesn't say, I came that they might have rules and have a whole lot more of them. But no, he
mm,
says, I came that they might have life and have it more abundantly. Christ
hmm.
came so that we could exist to a fuller extent. He came so that we could have a
Yes.
more complete existence. I mean, that if God is existence itself, then we know that living in accordance with God's will and conforming ourselves to God is basically
Hmm.
us striving to exist
Hmm.
as much as possible.
Yes.
And so non-being or privation of being, lacking those good things, lacking that communion, lacking that intimacy with God and with other people is basically just non-being. Like you said, it's what we'd call sin. I mean, that's really what sin is sin is
Mm,
just choosing to exist a little bit less.
mm,
Every time
yes.
we sin and every time we enter into habitual sin, we're just, even if we don't think this out loud to ourselves, what we really are choosing with our will is that, you know what, God, I know the full way that you want me to exist. I know the abundant life that you want to offer to me, but I don't care. I'm going to settle for less. And we do that. We can
Yeah.
get into habits of doing that. And with things that are addicting, we can get fully hooked on that, right? We can get used to that. So much so that the feeling of emptiness, that feeling of privation and lacking of life, that inner death can become comfortable to us, which is really a scary place to be. But the way to
Yes.
break out of that, sometimes we think the way to break out of that is really just to continue to be on our own, but now following a certain set of rules. Like, oh, I've been struggling with habitual sin, or I've been struggling with this addiction. I've been struggling with drinking too much alcohol or using drugs
Yes.
or whatever it might be. So you know what? The way I'm going to overcome that, the way I'm going to overcome drugs or alcohol or porn or whatever,
Mm,
is I'm just going to start following rules and following habits, but still doing it on my own as a self.
yeah.
When in fact, Christ is
Yeah.
saying, no, silly, idiot. No, he doesn't call us idiot. He calls us his friends. But
Right.
what he's saying to us is, look, my friend,
Yeah.
I'm offering you the whole point of the incarnation, the whole reason why I came to you is so that you can do this with me. You can go through these
Mm,
struggles with me. You can endure the spiritual battle with my help and with the help and the support of the
mm,
people around you who are sharing in the faith. So that communion can be our our safe place. It can be our
Mm-hmm.
fortress. It can
Mm-hmm.
be the place where we're actually at home. It can be our field
Yes.
hospital when we fall and when we make mistakes,
Right.
because that's what we need. We don't need to try to just do it on our own, because then ultimately we never really overcome sins if we try to overcome them on our own.
Mm.
We need to
I love it.
return to communion. But what
Mm.
do you think is,
Wow.
we're talking, I guess, in abstractions.
Sure.
What do you think are some concrete ways that a young guy our age can strive for communion with his
Good.
spiritual brothers and sisters?
Good.
Because we live in a world where
Mm.
there's more communication than ever before. There's
Mm-hmm.
more instant globalization and sharing ideas and sharing posts and sharing
Mm-hmm.
content than ever before through social media and just the internet and everything. And yet there's also so much loneliness, and
Mm-hmm.
there's so much a sense of isolation. So what do you think are some
Mm-hmm.
ways that concretely
Mm.
we young people especially could work on actually having more communion and really overcoming loneliness?
Mm-hmm. First thing that comes to mind, many things come to mind. Next time, this is something I've been trying to do, and I'll get real practical and
Yeah,
say this.
no,
The
practicality
next
is
time you're
key.
having a conversation with someone, the next time you're having a conversation with someone, anyone, and by conversation, I don't mean like a little, whatever, small interaction.
Not
I
small
mean like
talk.
when you're speaking to someone, anyone, at the beginning of the conversation, when you come to a pause, when the other person stops speaking, ask one more question. That would be the first thing.
Ooh,
If your instinct is to say something, ask another question before you say what you were going to say.
yeah,
And just try that. See how that changes the way you approach the person, right? Now, in this case, like talking with you, we've asked questions back and forth, but I also like vibing. And there's a time to just continually stack on, right? And say, like, oh, yeah, and I said this, and I said this, and right?
right.
And to do that. However, try asking one more question than you usually do and just see how it goes. Right? If it doesn't go well, whatever. But that's a step. And getting really good at asking questions to me is like a cheat code to it. Genuinely. Then, like we said, the prayer element, right? You asked before, what's a prayer for relationships? I think pray that a simple prayer of like, pray that God disposes your heart in the right way, that He softens your heart, that He makes you receptive, and then really believe that, like genuinely inhabit that space and be like, okay, think about interactions, and then to not judge yourself and think like, I'm being weird, I'm like a little too into this person, I'm too curious.
Yeah,
Just put that voice to the side and see what happens. See what happens. Anyway, those are some things that come to mind.
I like that. I think it's really good that you mentioned the question asking, because I've noticed this too, that
Mm-hmm.
it's really fun to watch how people interact. I love people please, or not people pleasing. I do people pleasing too, but I love people watching.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed the people that are the best at conversations and that have the most interesting conversations, and the people that everyone loves talking to, are the ones who are the best at asking questions.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to be a decent conversationalist, then have some interesting things to say. Sure, go ahead. People always encourage that. Like, you got to have some interesting things
Yes.
to say. You got to have some interesting ideas. But if you really want to be a great conversationalist and be something that could turn into a great
Mm-hmm.
friend, you should know how to ask good questions. It
Yes.
makes people feel loved too.
Yes.
That's the thing. Like,
Yes.
we sometimes forget how good it feels, or we forget the value of being asked our opinion or asked questions. But when you go to someone and you ask in a genuine way, not just in a passing way, how are you doing? Or you ask some
Mm-hmm.
conversation starter that goes a little bit below or like on a deeper level than just small talk. When you do that and you show genuine interest
Mm-hmm.
and a disposition to listen to what they have to say,
Mm-hmm.
it's mind blowing, because people don't get asked those kind of questions. We're a very
Yes.
superficial society. We're used
Yes.
to only handling things on the surface, only talking in small talk. But when you actually ask someone a
Yeah.
question and you show that you really care about their thoughts, especially extra points if it's a question that's kind of out of the ordinary,
Yes.
then it makes them feel loved. They feel seen. They feel like
Yes.
what they have to say actually matters. And
Yes.
that's an immediate way you're right, you can build communion through that. I have this one buddy who's actually been on the podcast before. His name's Vince, but he is phenomenal at asking questions. He asks very weird questions, actually. He has very strange conversation starters, a whole list of them. He's totally aware of it. But
Sure.
talking to him is so engaging. And you feel
Yeah.
listened to, you feel loved, you feel acknowledged just by having conversations. And it's not
Mm-hmm.
mushy stuff when I say you feel loved. It's not because you're talking about
Mm-hmm.
feelings a whole bunch. You're just talking about things
Mm-hmm.
that you both care about, but asking an extra question, asking a little bit more from the other person so that they can share stuff is huge. And before I become a hypocrite in that, I want to ask you more questions. So, yeah, that was really helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I think just the things you highlighted. What do you think?
Yeah.
Have you ever experienced faux pas in this scenario? Have you ever experienced relationships where you made a mistake in conversations or you just felt like there was consistently a lack of life or a lack of connection because of the way the conversations went? Like,
Mm-hmm.
do you ever experience that, or do you ever feel like there's some things you've learned from your own experience that you would work on better?
Yeah. A couple a couple years ago I got in my first serious relationship, I remember. And there were several conversations that I got into with this individual, with my first girlfriend, wonderful person.
Right.
And I remember thinking we'd be like driving in her car or something. I'd be driving or she'd be driving, sit next to her. And we get onto a topic that was maybe a little contentious or a soft spot or something that she wanted to talk about or I wanted to talk about, vice versa. And then I remember there would be these moments where I'd be speaking, I'd stop, and then I would feel like she just was sort of, you know, this just kind
Shut
of like
down.
closed off. And I realized, my goodness, I just went totally off. I went on my soapbox. I didn't ask any clarifying questions. And then I would get done speaking. And then I would ask her, so what do you think? Right. But the thing is, she hadn't been talking for the past couple minutes. So when I ask, what do you think? Or do you agree? She'd be like, oh, I don't know. You just sound like, you just
Mm,
have your mind made up. And man, I learned from that, dude. Man, I learned from that. The other would be conversations I've gotten to with people where I'm worried about myself. It's hard on Zoom because like you can see your face.
right.
And I find that I've been in conversations with people at church, for instance. And at the same time, when I'm trying to listen to them, trying to think about them, I'm thinking, man, I'm kind of hungry. I got to use the restroom, right? Or, I wonder how my hair looks right now. Do I need to fix my hair? When you're thinking about yourself and talking to someone, those two things are mutually exclusive.
Yes.
It's like attention. David Brooks says this in his book too. Attention is an off-on switch. There's no such thing as being like 50% attentive. If you're 50% attentive, you're
You're not
inattentive.
attentive at
It's
all.
just the way it works. So yeah, man, dude, I've committed so many faux pas because I can yap. I can go on and on and on and talk. Yes,
Dude, I've
that's a great
experienced that.
question.
I don't know if you ever had this feeling when I can remember one time I had something stuck in my teeth, or I thought I did. I felt like I vaguely felt something stuck in my
Mm-hmm.
teeth. And I was talking to someone at a meal,
Yes.
and I was trying to think of an opportunity to get up and go to the bathroom and check in the mirror and get
Yeah.
this thing stuck out from between my teeth. And the whole time I was thinking about that, maybe covering my mouth here and there,
Yeah.
and I couldn't hear a word they were saying. They were talking, but it was going in one ear and out the other, right? Because
Yes.
you're right. Attention, it involves being totally open and ready to what the other person is saying without regard for you
Mm-hmm.
as the receiver. You have to forget about yourself. And that's why I think it's really interesting. You were saying earlier that love is other centered. And I think that lines up nicely with what you're talking about with attention. Jordan Peterson often says that love and attention are essentially the same thing on a practical level, even on a psychological level, with how our minds process those different terms. Love and attention are one and the same. And so, yet, if being attentive requires that you sort of forget about yourself, you put your own needs on hold, you put your own insecurities, your own worries about the future, or your worries about where you have to be in 5 minutes, you put all that on hold and just put yourself at the feet of somebody else, put yourself ready and receptive to whatever they have to say, and actually listening to that, and taking it in, having some respect for them.
Mm,
If that's what attention looks like, then same thing with love, right?
mm,
Love involves that
yes.
sacrificial element of sacrificing your own concern for yourself.
Mm,
Yeah, that's why Christ says greater love hath no man than this, to lay down his life for his friends. What is the highest form of self-forgetfulness and allowing yourself to be consumed, forgetting your own concerns just for the sake of the other
Hmm.
person's concerns? The highest form of that is even laying down your life, losing your life for somebody else's life.
Yeah. Yeah. The death of the self, essentially.
Yeah.
Monks say, if you die before you die, then when you die, you won't die. And that's to say, if you forget yourself before your life ends, like if you forget, you're not going to have anything to lose when you die. You don't lose anything when
Yeah.
you die. So it's a lot. Like it's a super tall order,
Yeah.
but I mean that to me it's the aim of the spiritual life. I mean, when I was initially like going to come on this podcast, I was thinking, this is really like any interaction that we've had, I think, has always had this spiritual undertone, and
Yeah.
that's why I'm so glad we're talking about this. But like this is it. Like if you ask me what I'm thinking about this Lent, this is what I'm thinking about, dude. How do we encourage being over non-being? How do we choose life and not death?
Right.
And in some sense, although those are two very simple opposites, that's what, to me, the spiritual life is grounded in. It's that fundamental, do we choose life or do we choose death?
Mhm.
Right? I mean, yeah, I don't know.
That's
That's
crazy.
that,
I love that because maybe you'll have thoughts on this. That's sort of the
yeah.
mystery of the spiritual life too, is that on one hand you said
Hmm.
really loving another person kind of involves the death of the self. Fully loving
Mm,
God, fully entering into communion with God and with our neighbor involves some death of the self, sacrificing your own concerns. But at the same
mm,
time, doing that leads to the fullest life, right?
yes.
Um, it's funny because in a different religion, in Eastern religion, it's believed that paradise, or kind of the greatest final form of existence,
Mm,
is essentially non-existence, that you are dissolved into the great abyss, if you will. And while that's obviously false, because we believe heaven is the most full existence, and that the state we're striving for is fully being and participating in being, we
mm,
also acknowledge, yeah, that getting there involves a death of the self. It involves letting go of everything that goes into self-concern, being
yes.
totally forgetful of yourself. It's just crazy. It's a mystery to me. It's
Yes.
one of those
Dude,
wild
I mean,
paradoxes of
yeah.
spiritual life.
Yes, and I mean it's reflected in life itself, right? To live in a different way requires some sort of death usually.
Yeah.
Like to become a new being, like a tree in some sense, something to become a tree, the seed has to die,
Mhm.
right? In some way, right? But to say that is not to make it any less mysterious.
Yeah.
It's like when you die, you live. But
Mhm.
then when you live, in a worldly sense, well, you're dying. Okay, so what needs to die in order for the good thing to live? Well, I don't know. I'm not going to answer that, but that is the spiritual life. It's like,
Right.
how do you cut off what is unnecessary from your life
Mhm.
and live to what is truly life-giving? How do you kill, in a sense, I guess, how do you kill the right things in order for the right things to live?
Mhm.
Like that is,
Exactly.
it's this idea of like the pruning, right? The vineyard. I wonder if that's the reason why the Bible has so much resonance agriculturally, right?
Yeah.
Like this idea of
Oh, yeah.
pruning and trimming, like that is morality. That's a moral
It
life,
is.
is this like trimming thing.
The whole
Wow.
circle of life, dude, from the beginning of Lion
Yeah.
King, and just the way that organisms actually
Yeah.
do function that way
Right.
is
Right.
actually reflective of the spiritual life. And that's why
Right.
it's fair for us as Christians that the central image that represents our life-giving salvation is
Mm.
a man being crucified.
Hmm.
It's a
Yes.
picture of death, and yet for us it's a sign of life. And it's mind-blowing. And that's obviously just the fulfillment of the Old Testament symbol that we had with Moses raising up the bronze serpent,
Hmm.
where,
Yeah.
okay, all the people are dying, they're all being killed by serpents. So to them, a serpent is a sign of death. And yet,
Mm.
looking at that very serpent is the way to live. So this is just the whole mystery of communion, is that God is inviting us into
I
a
love it.
full existence, and to get there, part of it involves us losing ourselves in discovering life.
Speaking of losing ourselves, I like that we've gotten to this point at like as a close of our conversation, because Well, we talked about so many things, this like arc, but there's also this like Lenten undercurrent to our
Yes.
conversation. And you mentioned the cross. I honestly, I just think that's a wonderful place to like park because
Yeah.
that is, I don't know, that's where we're going to, right? The
Yes.
cross, death, and resurrection, right? And that, I don't know, I think what we have has it has significance in like a Lenten aspect too. As I'm feeling myself fade away, right, for lack of food, as I'm feeling a slight death of the self, as I'm tending towards death as opposed to life
Right.
sitting in this chair right now. I just appreciate that we've had this time to set aside attention, to set aside like our consciousness for this moment,
Right.
not in like a woo-woo way, but like to set aside our attention for each other.
Yeah.
It's like this is a life-giving thing. I genuinely believe that. And I just appreciate being a part of this, dude. I really
Absolutely.
do.
Thank you for coming on. Yeah. This has been life giving for me too. And thank you. Yeah, I wish I'd had you on sooner, but this will not be the last time. So thank you, dude, for just setting aside a couple hours.
I love it. It's my pleasure.
One last thing, if you just have just a few more minutes.
Yes.
You have your Bible with you?
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
Would you be down to read for us just a little passage
Mm,
from the Gospel of John?
I'd be happy to. Of
I think it'll be in line with what we're talking about. So John
course.
chapter 19.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something I wanted to do, is why, yeah, not a surprise. I did ask Aiden before this if he would have his Bible ready. So we both have our Bibles with us because this
Love it.
episode obviously is coming out not long before Palm Sunday, when we're all
Mm,
getting ready for Holy Week, dude. We're getting ready for the reality of our passion of our Lord. So John 19, starting at verse 17 and
mm,
going to verse 30.
perfect. Oh, it's bringing back TAC memories
Yeah, dude.
because this is using our
Oh, you
Bible.
got the
Okay.
Nation Bible?
Yes. Okay, sounds good. 17 to 30. The crucifixion. So they took Jesus, and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of the skull, which in Hebrew is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote a title and put it on the cross. It read, Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews. Now many of the Jews read this title, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Hebrew, in Latin, and in Greek. The chief priests of the Jews then said to Pilate, do not write King of the Jews, but this man said, I am the King of the Jews. But Pilate answered, what I have written, I have written. When the soldiers had crucified Jesus, they took his garments and made four parts, one for each soldier, also his tunic. But the tunic was without seam, woven from top to bottom. They said to one another, let us not tear it, but let us cast lots to see whose it shall be. This was to fulfill the scripture. They parted for my garments among them, and for my clothing they cast lots. So the soldiers did this. But standing by the cross of Jesus were his mother's sister, Mary the wife of Cleopas, and Mary Magdalene. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing near her, he said to his mother, woman, behold your son. Then he said to the disciple, behold your mother. And from that hour the disciple took her to his own home. After this, Jesus, knowing that all was now finished, said, to fulfill the scripture, I thirst. A bowl of vinegar stood there, so they put a sponge full of it on hyssop and held it to his mouth. When Jesus had received the vinegar, he said, it is finished. And he bowed his head and gave up his spirit.
Does anything strike you about that passage in light of anything we've just been talking about? That's not trying to put you on the spot, but
Oh my
you can take a moment,
goodness.
even if you need to, just to scan over that again.
This is bringing back, first of all, so many TAC memories,
Oh yeah,
but
dude, freshman theology.
my goodness. What I have written, I have written. That
Did it?
stuck out to me massively.
Say more about that.
What I have written, I have written. Like Did Pilate know what he was doing? Did he not? What was the import of that? There's so much there, but like the fact that like Pilate, this imperfect vessel, is
Hmm.
still in a way like proclaiming, like what I've written, I have written, because he is the king of the Jews. There's like this crazy paradox there. That stood out to me. I do not remember that line.
Yeah.
Wow. What about you? I don't want to take all your time, but what stands out to you in that?
No, I think that's incredible, and that has always been a very interesting verse to me. I'm glad you said he's an imperfect vessel. It kind of reminds me of the king of Persia in the Old Testament when that puts to the end the Babylonian captivity, right? And he's working on behalf of God. He's doing God's will, even while he doesn't really know God.
Mm. And maybe that's what we're doing too sometimes. Like this conversation is about us as imperfect vessels, like trying to gesture towards something,
Yeah,
right? Something more perfect. And that like love is what kind of allows us, what permeates us.
right.
Kind of like there's this Japanese art called kintsugi or what I think is what it's
Hmm.
called. Kintsugi. And it's where they take broken vessels and they put
I've seen
gold
that.
fill in the cracks.
Yeah.
I think that's what we are. And then God puts that gold leaf,
Hmm.
gold leaf in.
Like that.
And like Lent is that period of like shining it up a little bit,
Yes.
like making sure that we know that we've been pieced together with something that's like really, truly wonderful
Hmm.
and truly life-giving. But we forget that.
It's hard because part of Lent also feels like us being smashed into those broken pieces sometimes.
Dude, yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
When you have
in
to
a
reckon
big
with your own
way. That's
attachments and you realize,
wonderful.
wow, I'm a broken
Yes,
person.
yes. Hugely, hugely. My goodness. I love that note. Yeah. Some of it's like being smashed into pieces. I'm gonna take that. I'm gonna take that.
I'm glad, dude. I'm gonna take what you said about the art, because I love that. I've seen that art before.
I'm
I
glad.
saw it on Instagram or
Yeah.
something one
No, it's
time, but
cool, huh?
it's cool.
It's
It's like a
cool.
really cool, fascinating thing, and
Hmm.
I wonder if it had philosophical origin before just being an aesthetic choice.
Maybe.
But I think the one thing that stood out to me was how, what we've been talking about is how to reach this communion, this union of God and man and human beings with one another involves some kind of death and a lot of sacrifice. And I just think it's really striking that in this passage, the last thing Christ does really before he dies is he brings together his mother and his friend
Mm.
John. And he's reaching out to a friend, he's reaching out to there's so much captured in there because number one, there's in general the relation between a man and a woman. In this case, it's not a romantic relationship, but just that paradigm relationship between man and woman that he's bringing together. But he's also bringing together and focusing on familial ties. This is his mother. And he's also capturing the particular love of friendship because he's addressing his friend John. So he's kind of all kinds of relationships are captured up in that one moment. And he's showing that, look, in my final act, I'm dying, I'm giving up my life. I'm doing that so that there can be more communion. And I'm going, even like my
Mm.
final act, my final words, some of my final words are to bring together people in communion, right?
Mm. Yeah. That's a perfect. Oh, I love that bow that it puts on this whole like conversation and everything. Yeah. It's to even in his parting, like in his leaving for that moment,
Yeah,
it is finished. And so many things are finished at that moment.
yeah.
And in some sense, there's this like uniting of heaven and earth, but also of man and a woman.
Yes.
And there's also this uniting of life and death, kind of in a weird way. I really like that reading, Nate. That's great. Well, 'cause in a way, what we were talking about is like, how do we get to know somebody? How do we come to, and ultimately, at the bottom of it is like, well, God brings us together to know
Yes.
somebody
That's why it's
and to know
mysterious.
Him. Yes,
No, you're spot on, dude.
yes,
It is God. And without
yes.
that, it's funny because this is just one branch of this that I know we've talked about it, not on this episode, but just in our own phone calls. One of those examples of two people coming to know each other and there's something mysterious going there and how they go from being foreign to one another to finally being
Mm,
familiar with one another. A kind of similar example of that, or an analogy of that, is how we even come to know knowledge, right? Like there's
hmm.
us, and then there's the information of the truth that we want to take in, whether it's in school or like learning a new skill. And there's this mysterious process where at some point at the beginning it's foreign to you. You're not integrated with the knowledge or the truth that you're trying to know. But then somewhere along the lines, after taking it in, eventually you are familiar, and eventually you do have that skill, or you
Mm,
do learn that subject in school, whatever it is.
mm,
St. Augustine says, well, how does coming to know something really happen? What is that key X factor that causes your mind eventually to grasp a concept? What is that? What is that teacher? And his conclusion is that it's God, right?
mm,
In a way, God is that light that illuminates our minds so that things that are foreign to us, eventually we can come to grasp wisdom. And I think same when we're coming to grasp another person and come to know another human being.
mm.
How do we go from being foreign to one another to being ultimately in communion? It's God, right?
That's wonderful.
So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, that's unbelievable. I love that way of thinking about it. Mm,
Have you ever experienced
because
that?
well, it's like it's being a non-being too. It's
Yeah,
bringing something into being.
right.
And the only way to bring something into being is in some sense to have being to give to it.
Yeah.
So like in any act, there's like this creation aspect, and God has given us a bit. He's given us humans a little bit of that potential,
Hmm.
but ultimately, He's still doing the creating in us, the bringing about of any increase and stuff. So I totally think that's true in my life. I mean, even if you don't realize it at the moment, you realize that any sort of moment of insight that you've gained, like, how did I ever come up with that? I
Yeah,
have nothing to give, right? I have
right.
nothing. Like, it had to be from some external kind of input.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, man.
yeah, wow.
Maybe we should end with this, but I love what you said about
Sure.
the creative aspect, that there
Hmm.
is some amount of potential, some amount of power and agency that God gives us in coming to know things and coming to know one another and coming to have relationships with other people. We do have a role, we have agency, but ultimately there's that spark or that kind of X factor that ultimately only God can do.
Hmm.
There's that connection that only
Hmm.
He can foster and produce. You even see that in the marital act, right? When it's
Yes.
properly ordered, and it's properly ordered
Yes.
towards procreation of children.
Yes.
There's the husband and the wife, they come together, but
Yes.
that fundamental mode of communion
Yes.
between them on a physical level that results in life, that involves God's creation and Him acting
Yes.
as a creator. That's why I think it's so fitting you brought up that even Christ saying it is finished at the end of His life is important, because another way you can translate that it often is translated is it is consummated, right? As if this is a marital act
Ooh.
between God and man,
Fitting place to end the marital act.
right?
There we go.
So true.
That's wonderful.
It's a marital act that
Yeah.
produces
I mean, yeah.
it's like a death of the self, but it's a life of something
Yes.
else, right?
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Bro,
Very
thank you so
fitting.
much for being
I
on.
think
This
it's a
was
great.
awesome.
Thank you, dude.
Blessing.
Thank you for your time, for your attention, your questions.
Oh,
I love you, brother. I love you,
I love you
brother.
too, man. You have a blessed Lent, bro.
You too.
All right. And thank you all for listening. I hope you enjoyed this extra long episode. Yeah, just didn't want to stop. So thank you for listening. God bless.